So I'm not going to waste time introducing myself, apart from to say I hesitate to chair a session on education on April Fool's Day.
It's after 12.
It's after 12. But I am reminded the first monarch of the United Kingdom was called the wisest fool in Christendom. And his mother said, "In my end is my beginning." And our first speaker is Guy Baxter. Thank you, Guy. And he is the archivist here. And it's important that we know where we have come from, because as Elian said, all time is eternally present. So we need to know the last note of music before we can anticipate the next. So thank you, Guy, and I'll keep you to time.
Thank you very much. I will try to be brief. I just dropped the lights here a little bit. Is that okay for seeing the screen now? And okay for you, Tom, for recording?
Darker.
Bit darker? Yeah. So this is an archivist presentation. This is not an academic presentation. I'll let my esteemed colleagues later who will be giving you the rundown. This is an archivist having a bit of a delve around and seeing what they could find out. I will probably be therefore asking more questions than I managed to answer. Title of my presentation, well, let's start with the subtitle. The first English university course in landscape architecture 1930 to 1959. Now, until very recently, the University of Reading was claiming to have the first female professor at a British university. Thanks to some work by one of my colleagues in Scotland, we have now discovered we have the first female professor at an English university. So well done to them. But I'm pretty sure this is the first English university landscape course in landscape architecture. But the title of my presentation, Science and Art, has really emerged from this, because that's essentially what the broad theme that we're taking here is, to look at both the science and the art that feeds into this, and that feeds in at that time very much into education more generally, or certainly in the build-up to Reading taking on this course. Science and art is an interesting thing. So where better to start than with C.P. Snow's concept of the two cultures as our title. So this idea that science and art have drifted apart. You can see this here is a board that says School of Science and Art. This is just along the corridor in the archive office in one of the rooms. And it reminds us as a university where we come from. We come from a school of science, in this case art and science, you never know which way around it's going to go. Teaching various things. You can see there's science lecture rooms, and there is an antique room and various other things. That was actually the university's origins down in the town. I'll come on to that in a little bit, but what I wanted to do first was I wanted to go through a few quotes. So firstly, this is some from a publication in 1904 by a chap called John Wright, who was the chief horticulturalist for Surrey Education Committee, and he'd been invited to Reading to speak, we think, and he'd written some notes for young gardeners. And he said there's been too much practice without science, and there is now, in some directions, too much science without practice in the teaching of gardening. That's a quote that he got from an anonymous young gardener, about that balance in horticulture between practical work and between application of science. Esteemed colleague Robert has been invaluable, as has Jan's work on the early course in terms of starting me off on this. But one of the important things that they noted is that the Reading course straddled these two departments. It comes from the horticulture department and it comes from the fine art department, and it's kind of this split personality that is one of the things we'll be examining. And then finally, just on the Landscape Institute's website now, you can see that most careers in landscape require education in some or all of the following areas: landscape design, management, science, planning and urban design. So we're not necessarily saying art, we're saying design twice, and we're saying science as well. Apologies to Colin for blatantly using one of Moore Peter Brooks' Reading Town Centre designs. Some questions and answers that we'll try to look at today. Why and how did Reading come to be involved in this area of education? Who studied on the course and what happened to them? And what else can we learn? That's essentially me saying, actually, over to other people, I can't necessarily answer all these questions. And the reason I can't answer them is because there's a wealth of information, fortunately, that has survived. So, like so many things, and so many good things, it all begins with the Great Exhibition of 1851. So we thank Prince Albert for his contributions. So you can imagine that this is going to be essentially about a broader cultural history and a broader educational history, because one of the things about the Great Exhibition is that it's about bringing together science and art, and so many things come out of that. So what does it lead to? Well, actually, interestingly, one of the first things it leads to is actually this Crystal Palace School of Art, which then in 1881 starts the Crystal Palace School of Gardening and Practical Floriculture and Landscape Gardening, which is under the auspices of Milner White. Milner White obviously offering very professional training. You can see they also obviously landscaped the move of the Crystal Palace to Sydenham, and we have some of the Milner White drawings here. But the Crystal Palace School of Art is one of many schools of art and schools of science that are established around the country. Now, they become all kinds of different institutions as their history continues. One of the most famous probably being the South Kensington Museums, therefore Victoria and Albert Museum, Science Museum, Natural History Museum. They begin life as a government school of science and art. But there is a School of Art in Reading in 1860 and a School of Science in 1870. So that's before we have the gardening there, but clearly there's similar things going on in South London with Crystal Palace School. In 1882, those Reading schools merged, so we get that's when we get that board, this is the School of Art and Science. And in 1885 to 1892, you get a kind of, that I suppose small technical college in the town moves up to a kind of a university level education thanks to the intervention of the Oxford University Extension movement. And in 1892 that becomes a university college. So the School of Science and Art disappears, it becomes part of the university college, and in 1926 it gets its charter. So I put in here in red, Institute of Landscape Architects founded, 1929. 1930 the Reading Diploma course begins, and then as it happens in 1936, the Crystal Palace burns down. I don't think we know when the Crystal Palace course finishes, because the records, I imagine, are lost in the fire. So a bit of a shame. So we're not the first people to be offering a course in this area, but we are the first to be doing it at the university level, and that gives you a bit of the context. But ultimately, this all grows out of this science and art, these science and art schools, these ideas, and these continue to have an influence as we see the Reading course develop. It's growing from a university that is coming out of these science and art schools in the 19th century. Horticulture, I put a hyphen in, because essentially this is largely a matter that's about the culture of the university at the time. So, as Robert has pointed out, and others have pointed out, the university's landscape architecture course is partly in the Department of Horticulture and partly in the Department of Fine Art. So it makes sense for us to be looking, we can imagine why art is here, because it starts as a school of art, but why is horticulture something that's important at Reading? Why is horticulture a growing part of it? Well, partly that relates to the choice of technical subject by the University of Reading. The University of Reading chooses agriculture as its main technical subject. And it does that, I'm just going to reference the work of W.M. Childs, who was the first Vice-Chancellor of the University, and he very clearly states why that is, and it's because they look at what the industries are in Reading, and they find that there is no industry in Reading. There's a biscuit manufacturer and there's a seed merchant, and basically, so the business of Reading is agriculture. The business of Reading is being in many ways a market town, and so agriculture becomes the choice of subject area. The choice of technical subject that Reading does, and then comes to dominate in many ways what Reading does. I think it's also worth saying that in many ways, the university, when it gets its first campus up here at London Road, is a university that's in a garden. It's in one of the Palmers' back gardens, really. The land is given by one of the Palmers, Punty and Palmer's Biscuits, and essentially it is in a garden. If you read the chapter on our new home in Child's book, he's referencing the birds and all sorts of other things, and he's talking about the flowers. And he's great. This actually really is a description of a garden as much as a description of how a university works. The first professor of fine art is Alan Seaby. Famous here, we actually have his ladybird book illustrations for the British birds and their nests. And it suddenly occurred to me, actually, even the art department, they're interested in wildlife. They're interested in things that are to do with the countryside. They're not. This is not a kind of a this is not an urban setting in many ways, in the way that perhaps we think of Reading very much now. It has that link to the countryside. And I think it's also important in that context to think about the role of seedsmen, such as Sutton Seeds. So Sutton Seeds are a big part of the town. The Suttons are involved in the university. And just giving a very direct example, I just mentioned Sidney Wilson. Now, we have his application to join the Institute of Landscape Architects. He's member number 24, so we're quite early. And he's actually not working for Suttons, he's working for Carter's Seeds in South London. Tony will know where that is. And so clearly there are people who are connected with seedsmen as well, so that's another kind of network that perhaps Reading is picking up on as well, is that idea that actually horticulture is an important part of what's going on here. The other thing, and this is described by Childs as a feminist experiment, but it's actually very important actually, is that Lady Warwick establishes a hostel from 1898 to 1903 for women who are being trained for surplus women in the lighter branches of agriculture. I don't know what surplus women means, or really what the lighter branches of agriculture means, but
husbands killed.
Really, yeah, I mean, quite an extraordinary venture, but which actually becomes Studley College, which is a women's agricultural college, no longer existing. We do have their archive. Actually, I can say that for almost everything. We have their archive. So Lady Warwick's Hostel is actually really important because what it does is it leads to the establishment of the horticulture diploma at Reading, and horticulture becomes an important subject that we're teaching, not as a degree, but at diploma level at that stage. And who does the horticulture diploma? Well, Lady Allen, Marjorie Allen, and she is Institute of Landscape Architects member number 1. I have her application here, and she says training 1918 to 20, 2 years, Reading University Horticulture Diploma. So there we go. That's a little bit of context there about some of these pioneers. Arthur Cobb, member number 9. So he's in pretty early as well. Arthur Cobb. So one of the first fellows, I think there are 9 or 10 people who get fellowship on the first day, and he's a horticulturalist. Someone was telling me earlier that they've read his 3-volume book on horticulture. I can't remember who was saying this, David. Yeah. And a garden designer, and he we think brings in Geoffrey Jellicoe, ILA member number 10, and I have his application somewhere here as well. He brings in Jellicoe, who's much more on the architectural side, and in fact, although Cobb stays as a horticulture in the horticulture department, Jellicoe joins the Department of Fine Arts. So there's another connection there going on. But interestingly, actually looking at Cobb's application for ILA membership, what I've noticed is that actually, although I think it's very easy to say, oh, he's a horticulturalist, he's teaching horticulture, that's what he does, he's a gardener. Actually, he's under training. He's made a big thing of him getting his prizes for drawing, and he studied, in fact, at the Cirencester School of Science and Art, so another Science and Art School graduate who then goes to teach at this former School of Science and Art. And actually, on his application, he starts out by his response on training. He actually writes art and science. What is your training? My training is art and science. And I think that's really interesting how he's really made that. A part of what it is. Now I don't know. We haven't had the time to go and find out a lot more about Cobb. I think he's could be a really interesting and possibly to some extent overlooked figure in the early history of the institute. And just to say, this is just on the London Road campus, so you can see this idea of it as a garden. The cloister's gone up by this stage, but you can see they're actually teaching outside as well sometimes. So that's quite nice. We have some lovely pictures of life drawing classes outside, but they're not for the faint-hearted, actually. So let's have a look at some of the people who did the course. So in the period up to the outbreak of the Second World War, when the course is suspended, it's one of the courses that is suspended. Interestingly, I think that's probably to do with war service of the people teaching it. We have 13 people who gain the diploma. So we are not talking about large numbers. And this is who they are. There are 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 women and 6 men. So think about Lady Warwick's hostel and the which became Studley College, and you think about how that has led to the balance, the gender balance being very much kind of even, and I'll come back to the gender balance in a moment. So what did they go on to do next? Well, thanks very much to my colleague Jane Glanville, who has done a lot of digging around and cross-referencing between our list of those who gained the diploma and the ILA membership records. We've started to put together some ideas about whether they joined, and you do start to see some people who did go on to become members of the ILA, and you can see some of the places where they were working. So somebody who goes to Stevenage Development Corporation, which I think is quite interesting. But most of them are just coming through as kind of student members. So of the 13, we don't necessarily know. And one of the things we do need to think about is obviously because there's a large number of women in it, is about changes of name as well, and seeing if we can trace some of those. So I think it's an area where I think we can probably learn a lot more about those early members and what they go on to do, and also look back and see where they're coming from as well, potentially. And then in the entire history of the course, there are only actually 56 people who gained the diploma or the advanced diploma. And where we have one of them sitting here who gained the advanced diploma.
Only two.
3, in fact, so I'll come on to that. I will correct you, believe it or not. And you can see that the balance is actually just slightly tends towards more men than women, very slightly. So it's pretty even all the way through. You can also see that the number of diplomas that are coming out per year in that pre-war period, there are just over 1.5 diplomas a year. So in other words, they're putting 3 students through every 2 years. And in the post-war period, it goes up, and they're pretty much putting through 3 students through the diploma on an annual basis. That's roughly those who are being awarded the diploma. A few that we know about. Well, you can see that we've gone through the 56, and we've worked out some of where they went on to, whether they joined the LI, and also what they then went on, in some cases, what they went on to do. And I'll pick some of those out. So John Dunstan goes to be Deputy Superintendent at Wimbledon Borough. Richard Briggs joins Stevenage Development Corporation, and later I think he's at Durham for a long time. Gordon Patterson, you have to spot him because he's Robert Gordon Patterson, goes to Westminster City Council, where I know from speaking to him that he worked in fact he also worked on the Festival of Britain and on the and I believe on the coronation decorations, and then obviously has a later career at Stevenage. And then some information that I think Robert received from Pat and David Thurkettle. David Thurkettle certainly went through the course about other people who were there. So Bill Gillespie at Cumbernauld Newtown, and later president of the ILA. Michael Porter goes through, who becomes the Newtown architect. Michael Downing and Laurie Fricker, who are the people who gained the advanced diploma, and also Michael Laurie, who goes to Berkeley, California. Professor.
Not lecturer.
Not lecturer. So I'm basing this on the information that was received from the Thurkettles, so I've not updated that, but that's good to know. So I've said here, Downing and Fricker also competed advanced diplomas in the mid-1950s, but actually the year before you did, there was a lady called Shirley Cooper who was actually awarded the advanced diploma as well. So one I don't know what she went on to do, because we haven't managed to trace much about her, and we may be up against a name change situation. So it gives you a flavour of what people are doing and how they're coming through to the department, from the department into the profession. So what else can these things teach us, other than the fact that there's they're coming up with some nice anecdotes and finding some interesting links? Well, I think one of the things we should do, and I hope some of you had a chance to see the exhibition downstairs, is to look in detail at what was actually taught using those year-by-year examination papers. So we have the examination papers here in the university archive, and those are available for people to have a look through. There's probably, we had a selection out earlier, there's probably not a lot of point in me looking at those because I don't have the expertise to assess them, but I think it would be very interesting for people who are involved in understanding the teaching of landscape architecture to look at what's actually being examined, because I think those are going to be really crucial. And it's great that we can trace those through by year. I think it's going to be very interesting to continue to trace some of those paths that the students took and digging into the Landscape Institute archive to see how many more of those people we can pull out and see where they're going into practice. Because I think that's I think I think it's about the early history of the LI as much as it's about the history of Reading University. But I think the two together, having almost by chance the serendipity that I spoke about earlier for those of you at the AGM, having by chance put those two sets of archives together, the ILA's records and the university's records in the same reading room. It's an opportunity, I think, to do a little bit of cross fertilisation of those. I think what could be really interesting is to build up a picture of what I've only really hinted at today, which is that professional and academic network that was existing in 1929 to 30. Because I think we've got that at that point. We're establishing the first course. The ILA is being established. Who are these people? Are they speaking to each other? Is it significant that Cobb and Jellicoe have this kind of relationship? What was their relationship? How did that actually work? What was actually going on there? And who else were they interacting with that we perhaps have overlooked? Is it significant that Lady Allen had this Reading connection as well? That she was coming through with this with the Reading connection? Is that also significant? Is she exerting influence in this way? How do all these people start to mix up? Is there a role actually of this? Of the people who are involved in Suttons and Carters and the seedsmen? Are they part of this network? What exactly is going on? So this professional network and this academic network are clearly really, I don't even know if we can even call it an academic network at that stage. I think it's a professional network that spills over into education. I think that's almost more what it is at that stage rather than being more formal. But I think people are obviously also bringing their academic background into it, and the person who taught them may be significant. So I think those are the things that we can learn from looking at this course and its history in perhaps a little bit more detail. So I wanted to talk about.
You should resign immediately.
I wanted to talk about Brenda Colvin's relationship with the University of Reading as a bit of an aside, but it was a good thing for us to find. It's not the greatest moment in the University of Reading's history, I must say. Brenda Colvin, member number 8. She's brought in to advise the University Landscape Subcommittee about White Knights Park in 1953. This is obviously an earlier view of White Knights Park. In 1954, the committee has doubts about the arrangement, especially Miss Colvin's desire to work at landscape scale. Apparently, she wants to have a plan for landscaping the whole of White Knights Park, or dealing with the landscape of the whole of White Knights Park, rather than just looking at each building as it goes up.
Where to put the flower beds.
The committee, which it would not surprise you to learn, is headed by someone called Palmer. As all good university committees at the University of Reading are. Yes, clearly doesn't get on very well with this. And she is asked by the architects, I must say I don't envy them this job, to plan only a limited area between the Letters building, so now in fact named for the first female professor at an English university, Edith Morley, the Morley building, and the lake. So she's given a small part to work on. In 1955, Miss Colvin is reported to have withdrawn. We have been imagining the sort of language she may have been expressing at that point when she was, I think, somewhat unceremoniously demoted, I would suggest. And a lady called Mary Brandle, I think we say it, steps in and clearly is more aligned to the committee's strong views on how she should proceed. So a missed opportunity for the University of Reading now. And I have to say, of course, Brenda Colvin is then later joined by Gordon Patterson, whose very detailed plans for the re-landscaping of White Knights Park are also completely ignored by the University of Reading committees, and a fact that I know Gordon found particularly amusing. Not that strangely is not the first time we've managed to reject the work of a major figure. So I'm going to finish with something a bit more positive about my institution, and I'm going to return to John Wright's A Few Words to Young Gardeners, which is a lovely little pamphlet. So he's an FRHS and a winner of the Vetch Memorial, and Chief Horticulturalist for Surrey Education Committee, and he's writing in 1904 in compliance with a desire expressed by the influential gentleman with whom I have the honour and pleasure to be associated on the Gardens Committee of University College Reading. And he wants to write a few lines on a subject of immediate and potential importance, the higher education of gardeners. And he gives us this rather lovely quote as well as most of what he's talking about really is about science versus practice. He says, as a worker and student for over 60 years, no better combination of science and practice in gardening is known to me than is now represented in this important educational centre. A real centre of light, and leading it assuredly is, as established in the pleasant surroundings of the capital of the Royal County, the prosperous, salubrious and world-famed town of Reading. So there we are. At last, some praise for our much maligned town. So I hope that was at least a snippet of what we could potentially learn from the early course, the early days of landscape architecture education and its role at Reading.
Brilliant.
Thanks, Guy. I think we'll take questions all in one mass at the end. I think it's entirely appropriate, hearing that the Landscape Institute archive is situated here, because in a sense things have come full circle. There's a bit of setting up to do before Jan Woudstra, our next speaker. Jan is from the University of Sheffield, but obviously he comes from the Netherlands. It's interesting, one of the thoughts that's been going through my mind since Robert invited me to do this is, have the Landscape Institute, in terms of the way it codifies and regulates education, moved away from what the schools are doing, and vice versa? Are their paths now divergent? Because the Landscape Institute, since the 1980s, the first drive for expansion, has tried to make the profession much broader. But by and large, the schools have remained doing the same thing. Still, they are pursuing and developing courses in design and landscape architecture. The expansion which the Landscape Institute has dreamed about as a way of getting more members, getting more income, getting more power, hasn't really happened, isn't really reflected by the suite, the portfolio of programmes that currently exist. Which leads me neatly onto Sheffield, because Sheffield is one of the places which really has tried to do it, and it had joint honours. I'm coming to that. Has tried to do that with joint honours programmes in landscape and ecology, landscape and archaeology, and landscape and architecture. And I think there's one more, landscape and planning. But Jan will correct me, these courses haven't proved very successful as an alternative to the mainstream strand of landscape architecture. And the other thing we should note about Sheffield is, unlike many, many programmes in higher education institutions in the UK, it is highly successful in numbers, income, staff, academic staff numbers, research, quality of research. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing what the big secret is about Sheffield. There are Chinese.
That's the secret.
Well, you say that. Yeah. You say that. The University of Edinburgh has a huge Chinese quotient as well.
That's 75%.
And Sheffield really is outstripping us in terms of research, the staff-student ratio, the fact that it remains the only independent department of landscape architecture in the UK. So, without further ado.
Well, I've got a lot to live up to, haven't I? Okay. Yeah, so I'm not just going to talk about Sheffield here. I was asked to talk about the whole development, and we got Brent Elliott, who once said to me, well, he stood there and he said, well, I said, I found this first reference, Brent, and Brent said, yes. Well, as soon as you got the first one, there's another one earlier. And that's what I'm going to start with, the earliest one I've found up to now. Yeah? For landscape architectural education, the Office of Works was instrumental here in starting the first type of education in, well, not particular our field initially, but it included landscape planning. And this is a plan drawn by William Talman for the Office of Works. They had a pupillage system going, which started with the arrival of William III, and that continued, and then it sort of petered down in the early 18th century. But basically, we see the results of that with respect to. I'm slightly off screen here. I don't know what the. That's better. Yeah. Good. It was all sort of based for landscape gardens. It was based around Brompton Nursery, the nursery which had been founded by George London and was maintained, and where there were a number of people who used the Office of Works in order to train their drawing skills, including Charles Bridgman and Stephen Switzer. So this is an interesting part of sort of the first education, and that was particularly in the field of sort of this, drawing and running of contracts, presumably. Well, it went down in the 18th century. The Brompton nurseries declined, and the pupillage system within the Office of Works also. But then it was sort of revived, and one of the revivers of this was Lancet Brown, who employed Samuel Lappage to take over and became his pupil. And that is distinct from what I'm going to refer to in a minute. It is the apprentice system. So the pupil had a set number of tasks which they had to accomplish in order to be able to continue. And Samuel Lappage ultimately took over Capability Brown's practice.
1862?
1862. 1762. 1762. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, the mistake is there. Oh, it's my rush, you know. Don't do it the evening before. So the pupillage system operated since the 17th century, revived mid-18th century, and the great person there was Sir Robert Taylor, an architect who set up a sort of a drawing school. This was later transferred to the Royal Academy, and the term used to describe the people who qualified was surveyor. And that it was also being used by architects as well as the gardeners. So Samuel Lappage was a surveyor. Well, this is in contrast to the system described and formalized by John Claudius Loudon. He described the practice as an apprenticeship, of a 3-year apprenticeship. So it was generally for a youth from between 16 and 21 years of age. Then you would become a journeyman, and journeyman meant that you would go on a journey and you would take a position somewhere and you would move after a year. And you would generally be paid less than a common labourer. And then once you qualified for that, then you might look for a position, a situation as a master gardener. What Loudon says, the artist gardener, there's very little demand, and it cannot be recommended in a general way, you know. So that was sort of his view on things, and that was possibly to protect his own bread and butter. So this system was the general system well into the 19th century. And And it has been referred to that is the School of Art and Landscape Gardening and the Improvement of Estates in Crystal Palace was also, well, in 1881, that's when it started. It was run for 2 years by Edward Milner and then taken over by his son. Edward Milner died of a heart attack. And his son kept going for until at least 88. They produced an opportunity much needed for entering the profession of landscape gardening by systematic mastery of its details acquired from practical instruction. That was what, and it includes all the things we can consider to be normal today. It included sort of site visits. It included redrawing. Oops. A bit too fast. No. Okay. Yeah. It included the outdoor work. So that was practical in the first year, this 2-year course. First year, outdoor work, practical gardening, and then the study of plants, and land surveying, levelling, practical field work, office work, drawing work, plotting surveys, levels, all the things which, but it was particularly directed towards estates and management of private estates. And therefore it included visits to gardens within England. So lectures on art, architecture, engineering and architecture. So it was a very general sort of education. And what has been said about the Reading course before, they had an incredible amount of lady applicants, which were catered for especially. So in order to and gender balance was achieved there as well. Then there were those where few men came in, and those were the ladies, schools for lady gardeners, and there were several of those. Lyme was the first one in Sussex by Frances Woolsey. Started in 1905, so taking in ladies on an annual basis and training them for skills in gardening and garden design. I'm sorry, I borrowed a Dutch image here on the right. It happens to be in French, but it is Alice de Stur. She was married to an Englishman. So this was considered the quickest way of training, in horticulture. But again, all became pretty standard. Land survey, plant drawing at the college, and then natural scenery should be studied. Mornings spent in close observation of trees and shrubs in the countryside, never wasted, etc. So very sort of practical, hands-on, particularly dedicated towards garden design. So estate, garden design. These design courses became pretty general. Swanley was another famous one. This was run by Fanny Wilkinson, who had gone through the course at Crystal Palace. Madeleine Agar, who had trained herself in the United States of America, taught garden design there, including Sylvia Crowe and Brenda Colvin. Well, we then get Thomas Mawson, who was trying to professionalize landscape architecture, as it then became known. And he was called in by Lord Lever, who funded a new department at the University of Liverpool, called the Department of Civic Design, or it's also been referred to as Department of Town Planning. And Mawson did a course there on landscape architecture landscape design within that, which was referred to as a course in civic design. And it was taught once per week on a Friday, and it dealt with the arrangement, construction and planning of parks, parkways, boulevards and open spaces, with special reference to the kind of trees, shrubs and plants best suited to particular localities. It will discuss their culture and the art of pleashing, pollarding and plashing. You can see what he was influenced by, you know, the French school of sort of the art, Beaux-Arts. But Mawson had greater ambitions, and these ambitions included a course in either Oxford or Cambridge. That didn't quite come off in the way he thought he might do, and instead he started to run a course at Caton Hall in the lake north of Liverpool. And that was a 2-year course, which included, the same things as what has just been referred to, including studies in further design. And these courses could be taken separately or as one. £120 for the whole course, bargain, I would say. Yeah, and that is as 2 separate years, or if you paid 110 if you paid in advance. Colouring plans, development of park systems, planning recreational centres, design of public parks, the continued planning arrangement. So landscape design at a larger scale. And he had his students to participate in competitions, such as this one, for Wandsworth Park. We had very few competitions here in this country, but this was one of them. Pupils of Thomas H. Mawson, Lancaster. This is Wandsworth Park, different designs. And so Mawson, by the time he became the first president of the Institute of Landscape Architects, had written these 2 volumes. And actually, the civic art one title is a real misnomer, because it is actually landscape architecture. If he would have just called it landscape architecture, it would have been the most famous book on landscape architecture here during the 20th century. But he didn't. So in the art and craft of garden making and all the various schemes which he sort of dealt with. Yeah, and we've heard the story about Reading within that. So again, I don't think I'm going to add to that. Just to say that it was the first landscape architects involved was Prentice Mawson as an external examiner. And then here this book by Cobb, which was quite influential, and it also includes various of the other lecturers who've written chapters within this, which included Dillamore, or Dillaston, sorry, George Dillaston, and this is the kind of drawing skills which would be acquired. So this is Reading, very much in the tradition of art and crafts, Beaux-Arts, which have been promoted by Mawson, etc. Then there is the other strand, which comes through Patrick Gaddis, who, with his report City Development, as a competition entry for a park in Dunfermline, sort of provided an alternative to Thomas Mawson's approach.
Yes.
And this was ultimately transmitted through various generations of landscape architects to E.A. Rose. And Rose was the director of the Architectural Association, and he had a great interest in architecture, landscape architecture. And he had an advisory board that included George Pepler and Raymond Unwin, who were both planners, and Raymond Unwin had just produced a plan for London. And that's the kind of and they were inspired by Patrick Gaddis in their approaches. Jacqueline Tyrwhitt also took this on, and sort of she had trained in Germany, came back to England and was employed by Rose. And he appointed her during the war as a director of the Association of Planning and Regional Development. And she ran the School of Planning within the Architectural Association. So it was a separate school run by Rose. And the landscape architecture there was taught by Brenda Colvin and Brian Hackett. And they were sort of both engaged, and the outcome of that, you know, sort of the philosophy really comes through in their writings. You know, Brenda Colvin's Lens and Landscape, and Brian Hackett in Man, Society and Environment. But it also came through in Jacqueline Terrett's book, Human Identity in the Urban Environment. You know, it's sort of expanding landscape architecture to what it should have been.
Well, that was a statement. Oh, well.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so here we've got, and that is very much incorporated within the philosophy of the Institute at the time. Jellicoe became the director of the Architectural Association during the war, and he was also led the education committee of the Institute of Landscape Architects. And this whole philosophy, the gradation philosophy, was certainly incorporated there and is visible in the standards and the rewriting of this. And also
That's what they want.
certain aspects coming back, you know, the pupillage system coming back. But the fact that you could come from different disciplines seeing landscape architecture as a 5-year course, and then needing some practical experience after that as well. So very much online with architecture, and then or as a postgraduate course. Frank Clark ran the Reading course, and so what he got rid of is bookkeeping and chemistry, and he included things which were sort of history of garden art, development of landscape and growth of towns. You know, again, it's the Geddes influence coming through from the purely business garden design as running a business to something that is more philosophical and is then incorporates these wider aspects. And Brian Hackett comes out of the AA, is appointed as the first lecturer at Newcastle, or Durham as it was called at the time. In 1949. And then we've got other courses starting at the University College London, 1948. Again by William Holford, who was again influenced very much by the Geddes sort of philosophy. This ran landscape design as an evening course. So various aspects being included again, with similar courses starting in other places, and particularly the Leeds one was one of the first ones. What a response! This is the hero of Sheffield, you know. What do we get? He wasn't a popular man, but that didn't mean anything about the quality of his work. So he wrote this report on recruitment, training and employment of landscape architects in 1960, and that really set him on a course of looking and reassessing the education of landscape designers. And this led to the founding of a number of courses, including Gloucester, Birmingham, Leeds, Manchester, London and Dundee, which were later mostly absorbed in polytechnics. They were skills-based training, you know, that was sort of practical, hands-on stuff. And that comes through in his work as well. But just before Weddell came to Sheffield to become the very first professor of landscape design in this country, he had taught at Liverpool, and he had assimilated sort of the way of teaching, which differed from what was the way landscape architecture was being taught in the other courses, and having practical projects, running them and presenting them back to the clients, live projects as we call them now. He called it new, he called it the Sheffield method. And these were the kind of projects he was involved with, large-scale land reclamation, those were his, and because of that, these involved all kinds of technical problems, so he employed scientists to do this for him. And when the first lectures which he employed were scientists who knew how to resolve the problems of soil pollution and sort of land reclamation, botanist, soil scientist. So, and then he used them in his office as well. So, double whammy. And this is where the Department of Landscaping of Sheffield started, and they took them out on field trips. You know, good picture from by David Jakes. Does he remember it? No. Yes, and yeah, and then we get the Landscape Institute education system, and I'm sort of conscious.
You're okay, you're fine.
I'm fine? Okay. Okay, so in 1946, the first external examinations. 1973, we get the educational visiting panel. And then we get landscape scientists and landscape managers. From an international perspective, that is the most peculiar thing. And I'll come back to that at the end. And then the ILA becomes a Landscape Institute in 1975, and then a four-part system for professional qualification. Yeah, so, and in 2004 the whole system starts with candidate-centered learning. It will change again now. So we've got, I was afraid that I might offend people that I hadn't mentioned their courses, so I've made a list of the current sort of ones, just to satisfy the demand. Undergraduate courses and the postgraduate courses, the various, but they're not expanding at the moment. You know, there are occasions a new one, but we are sort of, we are not expanding as a profession. So what are the strengths of our profession over the last sort of couple of hundred years? There is a history, you know, and it's an interesting one. You know, there's a story to tell, but it includes, yeah, and compared with architects, you know, we're not a lesser part of that, you know. So it is just as interesting. We just need to tell the story. But there are weaknesses, you know. Ephemerality of courses, you know, the fact that they tend to close after a certain while. I've only included 3 here, but there are others I could have added to this list. There is a lack of research going on within landscape, which is within the current sort of academic climate, is a disadvantage. And puts you at odds with university thinking, so it becomes more difficult to fit within a system. And also we are told off for having expensive methods of teaching. Tutorials are expensive, you know, rather than doing a whole course with 16 lectures throughout a year. Yeah, a history course is much cheaper than having a landscape course where you've got to call in tutors to help you. So those are some of the, yeah, and then there's still, you know, still no consistency of the image of and the title of it, and economically sort of marginal. And you know, the one thing I call is there's no landscape planning. We haven't involved ourselves consciously or you know, so we've got a landscape planning section within the Landscape Institute. So, and then of course there is encroachment upon our field, or is it encroachment? Garden design, urban design, landscape urbanism all come up as new topics, and drawing student numbers. At the University of Sheffield we've got 2 urban design courses, neither of which involve landscape architects. Yeah? And yet they're being sort of acknowledged by the Landscape Institute.
Well,
So, yeah, they will be. It's the same with landscape urbanism at the AA. So, you know, those are sort of issues which are current. And a lack of understanding of the importance of the landscape. You know, we haven't delivered that message sufficiently enough. And you know, at the moment there are cuts in universities. Well, what's going? You know, expensive courses first. How can you reorganize yourself? You know, and it's the same. Not just at Sheffield; it's everywhere. Fees are a real problem. The level of fees. And a lot of students are now deciding not to study. So what is that going to mean? And then there's a demographic change. There's a dip at the moment. 15% fewer students coming through. That is affecting the numbers of applicants for landscape courses. And the new generation with their apps have got a completely different value system. You know, they have never touched a spade. Yeah, they don't know. They haven't played outside. Yeah, so you know, you're laughing,
no, it's quite true.
but it is a serious issue. You know, last week I took a group to Chatsworth, and I stood in front of a rhubarb plant, and I thought, you know, this is from China. Half the cohort is from China, and I said, what is this plant? And they all looked at it. But we are from the city. Yeah, we've never been in the countryside. Yeah, so that is the kind of response you get, you know. So only one student knew what a rhubarb plant was. Yeah, so there are plenty of opportunities. Yeah, and we're there. We're sort of in this interdisciplinary working is natural to most landscape architects, and that is there's plenty of work still. And we are at the heart of the current political agenda. So we should be thriving and being able to fulfill still these old ILA aspirations to advance the art of creating, directing, preserving urban and rural landscapes of these islands for the benefit and the happiness of all who should undertake the direction of the work. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Well done.
Thanks very much, Jan. We have time for some questions to be asked of both Jan and Guy. And I'm conscious I stifled a question rudely, I think, to Guy. Mark.
A question. 2 identities for you. One, Ulla Budorf is Swedish and is a very prominent practitioner in the post-war period, specializing in housing and parks. And I think also someone named Joan or Joanne Pym, who worked in South Africa and also did at least one book and was very active in a mining camp, trying to make those more habitable.
And you went through Reading?
Yeah.
I can't remember the name, but maybe there's a marriage change of name.
Well, Budorf was in your
Budorf,
first
certainly.
yeah.
The other one I can't remember going through. But I'll have
Again, there may have been a maiden name.
We'll have it. We'll
She
check all the
published
Joannes.
as Pym,
We'll check all the Joannes and try to track it down. Now, I should actually point out also that my analysis of gender was based on looking at the names and working out. So there is probably a margin for error in that, but it wasn't done scientifically. I just looked at whether it was a male or female name as far as I could work out.
They probably stayed with their birth gender.
I think we're probably safe in that period with that, but there may be a slight margin of error.
They were British.
Yeah.
When I stopped teaching postgraduate course in landscape architecture. I went from about 4 or 5 students a year to a gradual emergence of a polytechnic, and there were 40 first-year students. So the staff-student ratio for me went from 1 to 6 to 1 to about 300. From which I learned a very great deal, part of which was to emphasize, to give an illustration to what you just said about rhubarb. I asked these people, did a lot of verbal teaching, or inquiry anyway, have you ever grown anything you've eaten? And then the thought occurred to me, have you ever killed anything you've eaten? One hand went up. A person came and spoke to me afterwards. I said, I'm most interested, you should have killed something. How? He said, well, my father did agriculture at Reading and you were there. Only one person had ever killed anything they'd eaten. Fish? No. And as to plants, and I exactly the same experience. I took them to a big, Dorset College of Agriculture and Horticulture, and they couldn't identify Brussels sprouts. I mean, it was a revelation that how much knowledge I had by comparison. And a colleague of mine there said, you're the only person here who's actually doing any anthropology. You're the only person who's finding anything out at all. Everybody assumes, the rest of us assume that they don't know what we're going to tell them. But it's much more important we should know what they know that we don't know.
Yeah.
And I only wanted just to say about Reading, for those of us who are still hanging about, oral history, let me offer because those of us who are there have unsubstantiated, well, we can contribute, and I would certainly be pleased to do so.
We're certainly very supportive of that, and I know you've been speaking to other people about being recorded, and we'd certainly be very happy to support that if we can in any way.
Well, it's flattering to know that one possesses anything other people might want.
Helen.
A very predictable question for Jan, if I may. I will ignore your comment about why the Institute expanded into landscape managers and so on.
Oh yeah, do that, yeah.
Coming from mainland Europe.
I was just provoking you.
I was curious that you didn't list on the MSc, the Masters list, the course of why, the landscape ecology design and management course.
Yeah.
And so I'm officially offended, but I'm interested in why.
I can see that I might offend you.
Well, he missed out Champion as well.
Yeah. No, that's Gloucester.
Gloucester, sorry.
Yeah, that was on there.
Okay.
Well, why? I mean, it is has sort of been revived, or it has gone, the course.
It has gone, of course, but the period you were talking about was very, very active.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. It was very important. Yeah.
But it wasn't landscape architecture as
No.
your...
Well,
No.
this is where we get into the big debate.
Yeah.
I'm in charge of landscape architecture, but I'm not a designer.
Yeah.
So the use of the terms, the academics use architecture, the Landscape Institute uses that as the umbrella term. So we've always got this dichotomy between what is a landscape architecture course. It's very confusing.
Indeed, and the other thing is that, I mean, this is from an official list, which I just had a quick look at to get some names yesterday. And the names which are, there's only a very small percentage of names of accredited courses by the Landscape Institute. And all the other courses are urban design, urban planning, landscape management and something. So there are quite a lot more courses, but they deal with certain aspects of the profession rather than landscape design, which is what I thought the focus for this conference was.
But I think what's interesting about that we learned from the early period as well is that it's messy. People are coming from all kinds of different backgrounds and then being accredited. And I think there's perhaps a feeling that there will always be this dissonance, I suppose, between what's happening in terms of academic qualification and what's happening in terms of professional qualification, which is why they to some extent have to some extent sit separately, because people will universities are increasingly entrepreneurial and will find different ways of branding things and offering courses. I think this isn't something that's happened that's not new to us.
No, I'm not saying that it shouldn't happen. I think that one of the riches of this of the field is the fact that we've got this interdisciplinarity and bridging lots of other disciplines in such a way that we can all feel at home in under one umbrella. But that umbrella needs to have a term that is generally understood and can be sold to the general public as something, and there are issues.
I think assonance is a better word than dissonance.
Assonance.
Rhyming badly.
Yeah.
So, I'm sorry, just very quickly, Regent Street, Polly, you missed.
Yeah.
And I think that was
Well, I said this is not a complete list. I put a provisor in beforehand just to prevent this.
Okay, so I wasn't listening to that.
Question about
Just an observation, I'm actually an imposter, I'm an activist economist, but I am on the staff here at Reading. And we're taking the subject of course size very seriously now. So when a course falls below 15, the course director gets a serious hurry up. If it goes below 10 for 2 years, they shut it.
Yeah.
But it's not just for financial reasons, it's the awful marketing people you see at the bottom of the guy's slide who developed this limited business. They do massive amount of money work on student satisfaction and surveys of experience, and the students don't like being in small courses.
Don't they?
No, they probably won't tell you because they fear you might take retribution. When they're consulted in secret, they don't like being on a small course.
All right.
They don't feel involved.
I think what we learned historically, Richard, is that of course historically in terms of the University of Reading, they're not on a small course. I mean, they're actually on quite a big course, even if they're on 10. I mean, we're not putting big cohorts through in those days. And I suspect that the ephemerality you talk about is partly about numbers, and I think and about scale. And I think the courses that have survived have been able to work at a level where there's enough scale to be able to just keep delivering year on year. And I think that trickle clearly wasn't that was going through in Laurie's day. Was clearly not enough kind of critical mass to kind of persuade the university. They just had to keep doing it. And so at the first crisis or whatever, they were it was very easy to cut. But of course, Richard, I mean, your program course, that course comes out of your faculty. It comes out of the agriculture department, and so much that happens at Reading comes out of that initial decision to choose agriculture as its technical subject, and that's it's such an important thing in terms of I think university level education in agriculture, but also in all sorts of things that then hang off that.
But there's another point that Jan made about staff, landscape staff not engaging in research so much, because by not doing that, they're missing out on an income stream. So all research active members of staff earn their school about 30,000 a year from HESID. And to do that, you just need to produce 4 decent articles over a 6-year period. Which shouldn't be too difficult.
Well, I mean, I'm not saying that it is a problem in Sheffield, but it is a problem generally.
It is.
And it is something that is not easy to achieve for everyone.
It seems to be a problem because making landscapes is not counted as research.
No.
Whereas my son, who is a chemist, making bits of chemistry for firms, he's a practical chemist, is counted as research.
So the next REF is actually going to recognise it, but you've got to make such a strong case and build it up so profoundly that it is going to be accepted by, a committee that you don't know what the committee is going to consist of and what kind of backgrounds they are. So, but one of my colleagues is going to go for it this time, and we'll see whether she gets through.
It's not really an excuse because the architects have a similar problem, and they still score much better on research than we do, by and large, across the board.
They do.
But surely there's no reason why you can't write an article
on a landscape you've researched and created?
No, I mean, but it doesn't get done.
I know it doesn't happen.
And a lot of the most,
No,
what I find within us, some of the most creative people within our department aren't good writers. You know, they are struggling. It isn't, being able to design a good landscape doesn't necessarily imply that you're a good author.
No.
Does that the demise of the landscape planning course at Sheffield then? Because we've talked a lot about landscape architecture, but in terms of landscape and visual impact assessment, which is much more a report writing best in, discipline. Did the landscape planning course, was it a numbers thing?
No, it wasn't the landscape planning, but landscape and planning. Landscape architecture and planning. So it was a dual degree. And now it's become a single honours. It's still called landscape architecture and planning. But it's now run from within the department. The only dual courses we run now are with architecture. Because it's easier for us to align it with them, because the emphasis within planning is so much on research that every essay that had to be written became a real issue for our students, because by the time we get our students in on the course, the others have already had 3 essays and they're well acquainted to the kind of standards they need to achieve, and our students can't achieve that within that short time. So that's why that course went sort of slightly, and there was a different head of department, you know, so we decided to take it, and we had the skills in-house, so we decided to take it back. And it was the same with animal and plant sciences, because plant sciences, which is the landscape design and ecology, that is the degree, because the ecology has become so much more scientific that they don't look at practical things anymore outside. They don't look at plants anymore, they look at just the molecules of plants. So again there we lost out, and they couldn't deliver what we required. So now again we've taken someone who was teaching here in Reading, and he's teaching that for us.
We have time for 2 more, I think. Tony?
Just a quick, in a pre-Brexit article, I think it was in the Sunday Times, so I happened to pick on some student reactions to Brexit, and they talked about Sheffield landscape course, and it said there were 4 UK residents on the course, and the other, out of 50, there were 4 UK residents. Is that a proportion you recognise? Is it?
I'm afraid that may be the reality. This is the master's course. We've got a very small cohort. The applications from within the country have really gone down in the last couple of years since the fees have gone up. But we still get sort of between 400 and 800 applications per year and we at the moment the cohort, master's cohort annually is 86. So it's more than enough. Most of those, we've got 12 different nationalities, but the majority is Chinese.
The intake for the profession, I was just thinking what happens at the end. Is that we're going
to
see serious implication for the UK practice?
Well, they used to be able to work for a couple of years, and a lot of them found work here. The best ones always do. But that is not possible anymore since the new regulations have come in about 3 years ago. So they're all complaining, and they now much prefer to go to the United States, but it is still possible, although that loophole is also being closed. And Canada has come up as a clear favourite. So a lot of applications to Canadian universities have increased, of Chinese students to Canadian universities increased substantially.
I know you've been dying to ask a question.
Well, it's actually linked, which is just taking the lens a little bit wider. How does what's happening in the UK compare internationally, whether it's Europe or America or elsewhere? And then just a little ditty. When I was doing some landscape architecture and Baxter stuff in schools, the response from students was pretty good, but the response from parents was just amazing, because they'd never heard of the profession. And that was town planners coming up to me and surveyors, and when you explained what this profession was like, and you had all the imagery from the LI website, and you were able to say, well, today there's 25 jobs available, different levels, or 10 or whatever it is, they were just blown away. So the parents are interested.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it is a very different profession here than it is in the Netherlands, for example, where it is you're much more aligned with the planners and the architects, and you're not sort of considered to be subservient. Every time I've got here, you know, even within our own faculty, the School of Architecture considers itself to be, you know, we're it, you know, and we've got an urban design course, you haven't, yeah, and that kind of stuff. And they don't possibly say it like that, but that's, you know, it is clear from the kind of comments which the students come back to you with that it is the case. So yeah, it is, and I never had that feeling in the Netherlands, really. Germany also seems to be quite sort of even.
Okay, we have. We have to keep to time, I'm afraid. Could I ask you to keep it on ice till the end of the full session? Thank you very much. We have till 2:10 for tea. Could I ask you to be prompt, because the janitorial...
First of all, it will seem a bit autobiographical because landscape management and I are quite closely related. And the other apology is that some of my scanned material is from 50-year-old transparency, you know, the things that used to come in little cardboard bags, and they're a bit fuzzy. So don't adjust your brains. It's me rather than you. I need to go back before the landscape management degree, because in 1962 I came to Reading as a student to read horticultural science. And in those days, the professor of horticulture was an expert on cotton growing in Sudan, on male sterility in onions, and statistics. And he wrote a wonderful paper in the Horticulture Education Association journal saying, more or less, apart from flowers, horticulture really is the study of science. Yes. When talk about physiology. And so the flowers got swept aside. But we had lots of courses in physiology, in anatomy, in taxonomy, soil science, biochemistry, and so on and so on. There was a constant stream of proper horticulture. We had our own plots to double dig. This is me here in my red jumper before colour slides. Double digging the plot. I failed in my cutting up of pea sticks, but otherwise I didn't do too badly. But 1962-65 was very important because it was a time when the university was beginning really to move into white nights from the old London Road site here. One of the first buildings to go up was the library.
Yes.
And we had a minibus service to take students who actually wanted to read books from the London Road site up to White Nights and back again. And I'm sure you know that most horticultural books under the Dewey system are 635, which was, I think they still are, on the second floor. But some of them, to do with gardens in Joseph, come on the fourth floor as 712. So I spent my time hovering between 635 and 712 as a student, and there I discovered the resources left to us by the landscape diploma course, and it was amazing. And I'm pleased to say I was the bookman for the department for a couple of decades, and most of the books that went into the library subsequently had a landscape focus, including the Repton Red books and things like that. So I came as a student. Guy mentioned serendipity, and that plays a very important part in this story. I graduated, and then by various routes I ended up at University of Michigan studying landscape architecture. I decided my final year at Reading was in plant physiology. I did a physiological research project, but I'd already decided I wanted to be a landscape architect. And for various reasons, I came to the University of Michigan, which actually had a 3-year master's course. If you had an undergraduate degree, a bachelor's degree in landscape architecture, you did the master's in 2 years. But it also took people from all sorts of backgrounds: economics, history, English literature, horticulture, and so on. and gave them a crash conversion course and then the 2-year master's degree. And I was part of that. So this is me learning landscape architecture, and 2 of my flatmates, or apartment mates, were also landscape architects, and for my birthday, at 1 March, they created this birthday cake. You can't quite see the blue capability brown lake on it, but it's trees and marshmallow grass. So, 69, I graduated with a master's in landscape architecture from Michigan. Literally on my way back, I received a letter from the University of Reading to ask if I would like a temporary appointment, a 3-year appointment in the Department of Horticulture. My predecessor was an unmarried lady who had elderly parents in Oxford, and I think the assumption was that she would take 3 years leave of absence, bury the parents, and then come back and teach. And they didn't die. Father actually lasted another 15 years. He was too well looked after.
Was that Doris Hole?
No, Elspeth Harris. Doris Hole was a bit earlier. So I came back in 69. I thought it was a very good place to sit. I know the place well. I can look around for all the sorts of landscape architectural jobs that were then going, lots of them. And I was appointed temporary lecturer, and we were based at Shinfield Grange, 3 miles south of Reading, in this rather lovely, slightly 17th century, but mainly Edwardian house, with its gardens around it, with the horticultural station at the top of the hill, and so on. One of the first things, it's not quite on the screen, doesn't really matter, one of the first things I did was to plant a collection of North American trees in the garden at Shinfield, so I could sound knowledgeable about my plant materials before I readjusted to the English climate. This is symptomatic of one of them. But the course retained a very strong practical link. So these are the students. They weren't engaged to maintain the garden, but the garden was there for them to develop practical skills. This is a rose pruning exercise, and so on. Then Elspeth Harris decided that she would not return to Reading, and it wouldn't happen now, but I was simply made a permanent member of staff. I was interviewed by the Vice Chancellor, the Dean, and so on. There was no competitive tendering or CVs, all that kind of stuff. So from then on until who knows when, I became a lecturer, then senior lecturer, and for 2 of those 3 years I simply carried on teaching the material I had been taught at Reading on the assumption that Elspeth would come back and take over. So once I was made a permanent resident, as it were, I started thinking about the planning of the garden, new material, looking at the grass management, developing wildflower meadows and things of that sort. Quite early on I developed an interest, I've always been interested in turf management, particularly from the low maintenance end. These are some of my research. I did some research, and interested in the flowery meadow end of things. How can we manage existing vegetation to develop floristic diversity and so on. And by this stage we had a new professor, Peter Huxley, who recognised that the landscape had a future. He also was from tropical horticulture, but he wanted to build up the landscape side of things. The course was changed from ornamental horticulture to amenity horticulture. And quite early on in my career here, I started a landscape horticulture option, so that students could take plant physiology, crop protection, crop production by that stage, or landscape horticulture. And quite quickly, about half, we're always dealing with small numbers. A dozen is quite reasonable. But half the students were doing my landscape option, which I taught more or less in its entirety, and the other half was split between 3 other options with various members of staff contributing. Yes. But also, Peter Huxley had the idea of a course, of a course within the degree, a Comonan course, called Horticultural Ecology, looking wider. So we had visits to the Forestry Commission Research Station, the Institute of Hydrology, we went to National Nature Reserves. When the N4 was ploughing its way through, we went down to the site to see motorway construction, these sorts of things. And then there were lectures and visiting speakers on this much broader canvas. Because of my position of thinking, I was appointed to the Board of Governors and the Examinations Board of the IPRA, the Institute of Park and Recreation Administration. And gradually I was asked to give a talk and then a couple of talks, and then of course Mike Branch was teaching landscape design, and I started a course in landscape history, looking at gardens obviously, but also parks, the history of planning and that sort of thing. And the IPRA then was in trouble. It was a private body running a private course and so on. And I've always been very keen on parks. When I was at high school, before Reading, I spent my summers working in a local parks department. And so I suggested we could actually have a degree in something like park administration. And the reaction from IPRA was, we wouldn't touch a graduate with a barge pole.
Yes.
So anybody from a university must look like a Martian, be full of ivory tower nonsense, and they couldn't possibly run a parks department. They probably couldn't even prune a rose bush. So I was given very short shrift. A very important figure in this, for Helen's benefit, I didn't know she was going to be here.
Yes.
Sadly, this picture was taken from one of Tom's obituaries. He died last year. But Tom Wright ran for 25 years, I think, the LEDM, Landscape Ecology Design, and I think it's maintenance, not management.
It was both, it changed halfway through.
Right, great, thank you very much. So I will put a hash in it and add it. But it was a fantastic course. It had many distinguished diplomates from it, graduates from it. And it also had annual conferences, and I attended many of those conferences, and we went out to look at Wye Downs National Nature Reserve and simulated grazing trials. We looked at hydroseeding of roadside banks, how to deal with silting of reservoirs, you name it. But at one of those, I should also mention in the course of LDM that in 1978, I think, the ILA became the Landscape Institute with its 3 categories of membership. Interestingly, its journal changed from the Journal of the Institute of Landscape Architects to Landscape Design. So ruling out the managers and scientists, at least on the front cover. But at one of those evening meals during the conference, I sat next to a chap called John Parker, who was Senior Landscape Manager of the Kent County Council, and we were talking about various things. I mentioned my interest in parks and so on, and he got very excited and said, well, you should have a course in landscape management. And so that sort of crystallised things, and in 1986 we started the first degree course in landscape management, a 4-year course, 2 years at Reading, 1 year out in the real world, as it's called, and then a 5-year back. And it drew on, I mean, one of my bugbears is about art and science, and sometime after this we had a new professor who actually came from Wye. They were quite pleased to dispose of him, I think. And whenever he wanted to insult me, whenever he wanted to rule out anything I said, he said, well, of course you see things as an artist, don't you? Which I took as an extreme form of flattery. It galls me that art and science are considered 2 cultures. The 2 have so much to offer if they combine forward. But anyway, we had this enormous background of land material at Reading. And so I won't go into great detail, but as part of the curriculum we had plant physiology, taxonomy, soil science, and that sort of thing. We, in the horticulture sphere, in the narrow sense, amenity horticulture, turf management, arboriculture, landscape history, landscape design, little bits, not a whole course in landscape design, planting design and landscape management systems. But we were also able to draw on the resources of the faculty and beyond to introduce agriculture, forestry, ecology and conservation, environmental assessment from the geography department. We had a very supportive head of the law department who put on a special course early on, that was Susan Scott of course, in local government law for us, human resource management from agriculture, and later on, well, go back to principles of landscape management. This is, by this stage we were thinking about modules and watertight lumps of stuff. But the principles of landscape management course, once we were underway, I arranged the timetable such as the first, second and fourth year students were all available at the same time, and the fourth year students gave presentations on their sandwich year experience, and that counted towards the assessment of their final year, and they gave those presentations to the second years who were planning their year out, and to the first years who had no idea really what landscape management was about, and it gave them some idea of the breadth, which worked very successfully until it was scotched by later reorganisations. But also as part of the principles of landscape management, we invited distinguished practitioners from the field, people like Helen Neave, who you might just have heard of, and Nigel Thorne, and we were able gradually to draw them into the teaching. So for the first, four years, I taught most of this single-handed, and I didn't see my wife very much. But in 1990, Tony Kendall joined us from Bath, and was a real godsend in many respects, until he developed a closer affinity with the Eden project than he did with Reading, and he gradually drifted out. And he was replaced by Ross Cameron, very different background, but equally very supportive, and he was with us from 2002 till actually after the course folded. And he then very wisely, and I might say at my suggestion, moved up to Sheffield, where he's not only nearer Scotland, which he loves, but is in, I think, the right sort of environment for him. But we then were very fortunate in getting Helen to teach a module in landscape management plans, taking real life projects, and Nigel Thorne, who at the time I think was president of the LI, gave us a module in professional practice towards the end of the course. So very wide ranging, and the whole idea of landscape management was that it's a bit like gardening if you consider the whole of the globe to be a garden. 86 we started. Until 1990 I was single-handed in the landscape and environmental horticulture sphere, but that was further complicated because in 1988 we moved from our nice Edwardian house south of Reading, surrounded by gardens, to the delectable School of Plant Sciences, the Plant Science Laboratories, to join forces, and we became a Department of Horticulture, then a School of Plant Sciences, and as I moved out of the door it became a School of Biological Sciences with mergers and larger class sizes. But it did give me a chance to design what had been the Botanic Garden, 15 acres of garden, with no money, and we had an injection of money, so this is my design. And it had things from sort of twice a year bedding schemes through to wildflower meadows, and part of the core of the garden in this area was what I bravely called the new wood. And this started as 3 rectangular experimental plots of planting 10 different native species of tree with various ground treatments. So planting them into grass, into a mulched area, into Mypex sheeting, into wildflower meadows, all those sorts of things. And for a few years, while they could still reach them, the students measured those trees, the new students measured tree growth and related it to ground conditions and so on. So we have bedding, and for a few years, of course, the busy lizzies and the lobelia were taller than the hedges around. We were working on a low budget. But the students were involved in every stage, including planning, the rose garden, the crab apples. My little pet was the Gertrude Jekyll border. But we tried to cover the whole gamut. So this is delectable plant science. Outside it has some concrete planters, and the students had a project each year to redesign the arrangement and the contents of the planters. So this is urban horticulture, and a greater intensity of input than you would ever get in a Chinese paddy field. But this is the new wood in its early days, somebody doing some of the treatment around the trees, and this is it a few years ago, so it has become a wood. There's quite a lot of practical, but also what I regard as practical management. Part of the garden, it had a long history, but there was an avenue, actually 1830 one side, 1860 the other, of Turkey oaks, and under there great sheets of bluebells. And of course in the autumn the leaves fell off the trees, and I had a practical where the students worked in two groups, and one half used a leaf blower to clear up the leaves, and the other half raked the leaves up. And they had to calculate the area of ground, and they had to work out how many person hours it took to use these two different techniques. So some sums were involved, and students aren't often good at sums these days. But then I took a page from Brave Cobham's book on landscape management systems, and it says, to rake up 100 square metres of leaf takes this number of minutes. And so that's in print, so it must be real, mustn't it? And then we looked at the results, sequentially over several years, ultimately, about how widely different those figures were. There was one year when, purely by chance, I think, all the men were in one group and all the girls were in another. And you should see the productivity go up as they each strove to outdo each other. So you can then think about things like encouraging your workforce, how you can stimulate productivity and things like this. But we had a student transfer, in and out of the department, but we had a student transfer from law to landscape management. He was in hall with some next to a landscape manager, and our course sounded much more interested than the law course, so he wanted to transfer. He came over for an interview, and he says, "Is it true that you get the students to rake up leaves?" Well, we did, but it had a purpose. And another very important part of the degree, which evolved over the 25 years of existence, was we had two field courses. Early on, they were based in Reading. Then we were told you couldn't have a field course that was based in your university, so we had to go away. And then eventually we had a field course where a few days were spent here, so we had the opportunity of growers and so on around. And then more diverse. And because of Tony Kendall's links with Eden, while he was moving down, he actually did some teaching for us in a concentrated way with a week down in Cornwall. But we visited Brussels sprout growers, narcissus daffodil growers in a very different climate to ours, and of course land reclamation, Eden, education, all those sorts of things. And the other long-standing field course was in East Anglia, based in various places, but ultimately usually towards the end of Cambridge. And this was a fantastic place to be, because of course East Anglia, the whole landscape is actually man-made in a sense. And so we went to Wicken Fen, and we looked at the National Trust plans for extending the Wicken Fen experience to the whole of Cambridgeshire, 20 miles away, as the peak in the productive landscapes were worn out and so on. So you've got the so-called natural environment, which is not natural at all, and then the productive environment, which may look very different when we've Brexited. Great, thanks. I think I'm on court.
Yes,
and you have Polish and Hungarian and Moravian and Maldivian people doing the jobs that English people would not do. John Parker had been Professor of Botany at Reading for a while before he took the more august post at Cambridge, and he taught to us at the Botanic Garden. We looked at nursery, where do plants come from, nurseries, Titchwell Bird Reserve, an RSPB reserve, where the whole landscape is designed for birds, particular birds. The salinity, the relationship to land, to water, the cutting of the reeds, everything was dictated to making the home for birds ideal. And we had to bypass Melchett Meadows, Lord Melchett's agricultural land, where he sowed annual and perennial meadows. So the landscape management knew where plants came from. They saw landscapes managed for quite different reasons, and then the horticulture and landscape management students met, the horticultural students who looked at pea harvesting or something like that, and then we met up at Holcombe with its historical and land management operations. We had a picnic, and we studied dune systems and beaches and all that sort of stuff. This, incidentally, is landscape managers and horticulture students, undergraduates, and the MSc in horticulture. So, although we were very small in numbers, we could pool our bodies to make more sensible sized groups for strategic reasons. And I won't deal at all with this, but I do have, and I'll come back to that, I do have a list of who came in. I've taken the names off here, but there are 22 pages, for anybody who's interested, of when somebody came in, what they did in their sandwich year, what they did to their dissertation, and what they went on to do. And it's very diverse. I also have this summary sheet, which again I won't bother with now, but anybody who wants this can have it electronically. Looking at each year, the numbers are going in, who failed, interesting to get here, what sort of degrees they got, and what they went on to do. And I think something like 60%, 60+% went into very obviously landscape management related activities. Some went on to further studies, mainly landscape architecture, landscape design. Some we didn't know, and I know from subsequent experience that some of those became landscape managers in some way, and some went into unrelated. We had somebody working for traffic management for the AA, for example, the Automobile Association. But that also includes, where we draw boundaries, it includes people who went back into family farming or into farm management. And so that number is probably slightly lower if you widen your remit, and this is certainly lower. And they were very proud of being landscape. Oh, yeah, before I finish, I should just say that we had the benefit of this very wide range of material to draw on within the university, and a very encouraging factor was that the geography department, the law department, singled out our students as being much more highly motivated, much more interested and much more intelligent in many ways than the bog standard geography students or law students and so on. So they were known for their motivation. Just a few case studies, anonymously. RC did a sandwich year at a rose nursery. She was from Norfolk, did a sandwich year safely in a rose nursery, but helping with visitor management on open days and like that. But she ended up as the Crested Newt officer for Norfolk, which I think is a splendid title. EP not only gained a partner and later her husband, also on the landscape management course, but they set up a historic landscape consultancy, and they're still in active practice. CJ came to us as a mature student. She had a DPhil from Oxford in economics, and she had to wait to get onto the course because she was wrapping up a £2 million research project on African economics. TJ went as assistant manager for Hyde Park, and this chap, Matt, he did his sandwich year in with BTCV, British Trust for Conservation Volunteers. He then, after graduation, became a training officer for them, a paid post. And then the next time I heard him, some years later, he was head of forestry in New York City, not New York State, but New York City. And he was, this is him on the right here, he was invited back to England by the Arboricultural Association to talk about his work in New York City. What do you do, for example, if the mayor decides he wants to spend another $10 million on trees? How do you develop a strategy? And they were quite in trouble. What you do is to look at, you take your computer mapping and see where there aren't green spaces, where the incidence of child asthma is at its highest, and that's where you focus your tree planting. So very interesting. But we've had quite a lot of people going into local authority parks, into landscape management, landscape architecture practices, things that you would think of as landscape management, but really that covers a very wide sphere. So I do have, if anybody's interested, this is my email address. I do have this 22-page cohort progression of where everybody went and when. The cohort summary of how many people came in each year and stuff, and a 3-page course philosophy, what our guiding principles were. And the other thing I would say is that I'm getting old. When I left the university, I threw away a skip plus of bits of paper, and I really regret that. One of the first things I did when I came back to Reading was to inherit a plan file, and I'm quite sure it had some drawings in it by a chap called Laurie Fricker, and others by Gordon Patterson, who were some student projects, and they went, and they shouldn't have went. And so I really want advice now on how much of my stuff should I chuck in the bin.
We all
Why
feel
says
that.
everything.
My colleagues will be fighting over you, Richard. They'll be fighting over you.
But it's very nice to be thought of as an historical relic. So, thank you very much.
Throughout his career. Good. Okay, Robert.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is where I come from in terms of higher education, Newcastle-upon-Tyne, which was the second landscape architecture course in this country. It was set up by Brian Hackett in 1949, and as a landscape architecture course accredited by the Landscape Institute, it ended in 2003. There is a one-year master's course aimed at Chinese students, which has continued. Essentially, that's a list. The other thing to say is I'm particularly focusing on landscape architecture, education, landscape gardening, if you include Crystal Palace School of Landscape Gardening at the top there, alongside landscape management, landscape science, or whatever else. So that's a list of all the courses in landscape architecture, including Regent Street Poly, which is third from the top, which was mentioned earlier on. And on the right, you've got the dates of closure. Basically, there's been 20 odd courses since 1881, Crystal Palace, and half of them have closed. 10 of them have closed.
Yes.
So, basically this talk is in two parts. One is regarding university education generally. I'll try and brush through that bit, but it's particularly focusing on resources and finance. It's been mentioned as squeezes on education earlier today. So it focuses on that area, and then I look particularly at landscape architecture education, and that's meant to be looking at some lessons from the past which are applicable, and the future. In terms of income and expenditure of 2014 to 15, basically we're talking about over £30 billion. So it's hefty sums of money, and the important thing is that
income exceeds expenditure. Given that universities largely are charities, you don't have to make loads of money. You can tick over quite nicely. In terms of income, tuition fees is a hefty portion. Green and red together research grants, funding body grants in orange and red research grants is about a quarter of income, and then other income is about £6 billion. Another way of looking at that is as block diagram, in which case you've got just under half is tuition income, home and EU, and this is a non-EU, and this is research-related income, and then there's other forms of income. My contention is that universities are not doing badly if you compare them with either the Royal Marines, last couple of days news, or the prison service or local government.
Or central government.
I'm not going to comment on central government just yet. They're not subject to year-on-year cutbacks. It's popularly thought that the introduction of fees changed higher education. Well, you can argue it did in terms of opportunity, but it hasn't fundamentally affected the resources available to higher education. And this is demonstrated to some extent since 2004, the last decade or so, where basically income change is in purple, and that's been going up rather nicely until the recession in 2008. But even so, every year has shown that income has increased, and increased indeed generally significantly more than inflation. There's been cutbacks following the introduction of higher fees, not the £1,000 a year fees which were introduced getting on for 10 years ago in 2008, but the 6,000 now 9,000 fees. But the university sector has recovered from that. So one can contend that what has happened is that the university sector has been divorced by a sleight of hand from central government cutbacks in the way that it hasn't happened in terms of secondary or primary education or further education. And the sleight of hand is basically by removing it from the public sector borrowing requirement by providing direct funding from tuition. In those terms, from a university point of view, that is a useful thing. In terms of, obviously, opportunity for higher education, it's a much more contentious issue. So, looking back to the Robbins report, when was it, 63 I think, basically what has happened is that university education has been growing through the 1960s right up until 2008, where you had both the introduction of university fees and the recession, and then since then has been remarkably stable. Amazing. I'll put my pointer down, I've got too many of these things. The water. In terms of non-EU and EU student numbers, this is EU and non-EU. Looking at the economy generally, overseas recruitment is a good thing, but it's levelled off since change of government, 2010, first the coalition government and then the current government. So we've got stability or flatlining in terms of university income, but we haven't got a downturn in university income. Universities are doing, relative to other sectors and the what is effectively a state-supported economy. Student-owned company is owned by central government. It's doing jolly well. We have got problems in the university sector. Brexit, well, 9%, 7%. This was the earlier figure, down by 9%. And if you look at the white paper on the UK's exit from the European Union, and you look at higher education student numbers, where do you find it? It's in terms of migration. The problem is that student numbers are counted in the migration figures. We've got a government that's obsessed with migration.
I see.
Yeah. And therefore, we've got a mixture here of the anodyne. A global UK must also be a country that looks to the future. Well, yeah. We welcome genuine students with the skills and blah, blah, blah. But it must be controlled. We've got a government that wishes to control student numbers, and that is a major opportunity in terms of United Kingdom PLC, if you want to call it that, because we have got a good reputation compared with, say, Australia or the United States and so forth. But we're not going to get anywhere with the current government. If you look at research and innovation in the Brexit white paper, a lot of very good research is very good for economic growth and long-term competitiveness, and we're going to do remarkably well and produce lots of Nobel laureates, but we're going to lose EU funding. But we'll welcome a deal on European research. We've got a government that isn't being transparent in terms of what it wants to do, probably because there's different views within the Conservative government, certainly within the Conservative Party, as to what it wants to do. It's a big question of control and so forth. This has been mentioned earlier. Anybody with grandchildren or children emerging from primary school knows that they're around here, and we've got this 4 or 5 year gap where in terms of universities, the numbers of 18-year-olds, the numbers of 18-year-olds around about here are decreasing over the next 4 or 5 years, and then they'll increase. That affects UK undergraduate course numbers. So, in summary, in terms of universities, the number of applicants have levelled off, the number of students have levelled off. It's the end of high growth since Robbins. Because of the, one thing I perhaps should have mentioned is that post-Robbins universities have been expanding, and as a result have set up an economic model which is based on that expansion, and therefore it's inconceivable that one could run courses with 1 or 2 or several, or indeed nowadays 12, which was certainly what was my experience at Newcastle. What one needs is courses which are 15 or 25. The economic model has to afford the infrastructure which was modelled for a growth structure, and it's now not a growth structure. My argument would be that universities need to rethink that economic model. Being trite about it, maybe not too many vice-chancellors on £400,000 or £500,000 a year might be one rather simple way of putting that. Probably totally unfair to vice-chancellors. Anyway, only 50% of fees go to individual schools or departments who deliver the teaching or research. Everything else is a usual model. It might vary from university to university, which goes to libraries or other central facilities, recruitment and so forth. The government is blocking university non-UK student recruitment, for sure. Universities emphasise high recruiting students, that's my point about more than 15, more than 20, more than 25. However, compared with local government and many other public services, higher education is well off. The sector is growing, nevertheless. Yeah? So what about current landscape architecture education, particularly in the UK? This is not in the UK, it was a joint project we used to run in Lille. That's 2015, so forgive me reasons for I'm not quite up to date. but it shows the individual departments within which university landscape architecture courses are located. Department of Architecture, Birmingham, Kingston, all these universities are based in departments of architecture. None of the heads of school of those joint departments of architecture with landscape architecture is a landscape architect. We're subservient is the word that was used earlier on. We're in a subservient position. Otherwise, Cranfield, Sheffield, Hallam, Sheffield I think is landscape management, Cranfield is landscape science, they're in environmental science courses. There's Gloucester, the old Cheltenham course, which is in the School of Design, and there's a couple in land-based colleges. One would argue. It's that loss of independent departmental status, yes, with financial, independent financial decision-making by landscape staff, which is part of the problem. So that's Sheffield, which is the last university course. And Sheffield, of course, it's been mentioned today, is very much dependent on one market, the Chinese market. This is looking at nationally, not at landscape architecture, but nationally, first year Chinese and first year Indian students in the UK over a 4 or 5 year period. The present government doesn't favour Indian students. Jan, it would be nice to know, where are you, how your visit to India went. But it will also be nice to know how many of the students who are able to offer places can get visas. Because that is a real problem.
It's been a real problem,
yeah. I hear you, really. Now another issue which I would argue illustrates the subservient position of landscape architecture. It's in that number of full-time landscape architecture staff. It's the full-time staff who do the recruitment, if they're allowed to do it, who do the research, who do the course organisation, and so forth. Sheffield, being the one department, is 14, but most are in single numbers. One or two don't even get round to giving you the numbers. Their main selling point, their staff, which is perhaps regrettable. I've got a list here somewhere. Beijing College of Forestry, 78 staff. Cornell, it's got 8 staff. Versailles, ANSP, has got 32 full-time teaching staff. That's what they say. I think it's professeur or enseignant permanent. ETH in Zurich's got 14, that's just postgrad, 14 full-time staff. Harvard, it's got 18 staff. Leibniz University in Hanover, 13 professors. Berkeley, these are 2015 figures, 30 full-time staff.
Yes.
That's what I was told by the website, 2014. Overestimate? Overestimate.
I guess more like 12 or 13.
More than this number in most places, is my argument. Pennsylvania, 9 full-time staff, and that's just a postgrad course, and Wageningen, again, that's a 2015 figure, 12 full-time staff. The situation in terms of English landscape architecture education is not buoyant. Is what one can argue, right? This is just illustrating the buoyant end of the market. Another way of looking at it is in terms of UCAS tariff points. Remember, I think it's 120, which is an A at A level. Edinburgh and Sheffield are perhaps the argument would go are serious courses where you've got to have 3, 4 A levels, not up to the 400 points, which is what we'd like to get up to. The rest are be dim and do landscape architecture is the message I'm receiving. It's not good. That's an up-to-date figure as of last night.
Oh, golly.
Basically, I think landscape architecture education in this country has got real problems. Another measure of the number of professors. We've got 6. I did this in 2015, forget me if somebody's been appointed. But we've got 6 professors, 3 of whom are University of Sheffield, and then there are well, Catherine Moore at Birmingham, Alan Simpson at Leeds Beckett, and Catherine Ward Thompson at the University of Edinburgh. So, the others have got no professors at all. This is an illustration of research endeavour, perhaps. Perhaps. Might be the argument. Oh, here. You've seen this chap before, it's Arnold Weddell. 6 of the 11 institutions lack professors of landscape architecture. The argument is that landscape architecture is a low status area. Looking at applications, these are Chris Sheridan Landscape Institute 2016 figures, which are up to the entry in September 2015. And it shows undergraduate level, graduate entry, and then the total figures. If you look, going back over the last 10 years or so, if you look at undergraduate, this is applications, by the way. Applications are not applicants.
Yes.
In terms of these, divide the UCAS figures more or less by 5 and you get the number of applicants. Because you can make 5 applications as one person, one applicant. We're bumbling along between 800 down to 700. So a couple of hundred students are joining each year. Now the remarkably good figure we can quote are the graduate entries, applicants, which have gone up getting on for 5-fold, from 222 in 2005 to over 1,000 or 1,193 in 2015. Downside is the number of people joining and these are far less likely to be making 5 applications, more likely to be making 1 or 2. The numbers joining have only doubled effectively. So it might be that because of the low numbers, the universities are not responding, is my interpretation of those figures in terms of graduate entry applications.
So what do you mean by not responding?
Well, in 1 or 2 places, I think Leeds has centralised its Leeds Beckett, its applications procedure, so it's done by a clock in central recruitment. The academic staff are not. Anybody from Leeds, excuse me, I
No,
got it wrong.
that's changed. It's back in the house now.
Good, I'm very glad to hear that. But because of the low numbers, they're not responding in the same way actively and proactively.
Right, okay.
A good way of responding is same day that you get an application, you send a letter with full details. Do you want an interview? Or if you can't get, because you're on the other side of the world, you can't get here as easily, can you send a portfolio? Same day response from the department, which I would say, and then there's a dialogue going. And as a result, they're failing to capture the potential. And I think that's probably what's happening, particularly with graduate entries, who are probably more demanding, well, are more demanding than undergraduates. So the argument would go that because of the low numbers in most of the courses, there aren't the resources to handle the recruitment, and you end up with a downward spiral. It's a hypothesis. I've just highlighted the numbers which I've just quoted. So, despite the increasing numbers of postgraduate applications, some courses are not responding, and it supports loss of a critical mass of full-time staff as a possible reason, just repeating what I've just said. Conclusion. The full-time staff numbers are at a minimum critical mass in most of the courses. The subject is subservient. I've illustrated what that means. Perhaps. It has a low UCAS tariff point entry. We're trying to recruit the DIN. It lacks professors as a subject area, compared with what my favourite comparison is what happened in the States. Harvard, Cornell, Yale, Berkeley in 1916, all were set up by 1916. All are still there. Compare that with what's happened here. Relatively high cost, being design-based, that's been mentioned before. Low recruiting and not recruiting postgrads despite the growth of applicants. As a sector, we're not performing. So what can be done? There's no point in analysing this coming up with this glum prognosis without proposing what can be done. Well, we can broadcast in the general sense, and there's been a lot of broadcasting compared with the 1960s or 70s. There's a whole series of books, both in English, written and internationally written, on landscape architecture. Yeah? Communicate. Well, this is the Landscape Institute's bealandscapearchitect.com website, which does a fair job at communicating. Debate. We don't debate in British landscape education generally. This is in the wider sense of landscape, not just landscape architecture. Only Sheffield, Newcastle and Writtle are members of the the Council of Educators in Landscape Architecture, the North American based group. Only 9 UK higher education institutions, universities, are members of ECLAS, and very few turn up. So the ECLAS conference at Greenwich in 2017 is an opportunity. SCOLAR is not a place of debate. SCOLAR is heads of school, which meets with the Landscape Institute. In terms of free debate, and there's no landscape equivalent of the Association of Architectural Educators, which the architects have in this country, which effectively acts as a national ECLAS, which is a very good institution in terms of promoting debate. The AAE 2016 conference run by University College, it was a place of debate. Collaborate. Well, a good example of collaboration is the Dutch, who run a joint website where you can find up-to-date information. Sadly out of date now. This 2 or 3 weeks ago. Noel Van Doren was defending his thesis on the 3rd of March. The Professional Institute's got a new chair, so you can go to one resource and find out everything that's happening in terms of Dutch landscape architecture education. The Brits don't like to work together. And you can support. Now, a good example of support was in 1949, when Geoffrey Jellicoe was still president of the Landscape Institute. Lecturers in landscape architecture, this is Brian Hackett, young Brian Hackett, who was appointed at Newcastle, and Peter Youngman at the Bartlett, and that was promoted by the Institute of Landscape Architects, but paid for by the Cement Manufacturers Federation and Imperial College Industries. In '68, and I suspect it was something to do with, well, according to Jan, it was Brian Claston and his former partner, whose name escapes me.
John Kelsey. John
Kelsey, and under Peter Shepherd's presidency, he was appointed. Arnold Weddell was appointed at Sheffield, funded by the Northern Arts Foundation, effectively Granada television money, as has already been mentioned. So that's an argument for more independent department status. Chatham House rules, by the way, 2010. It was raised by the new head of architecture school at the University of Greenwich that landscape architecture department should be merged with architecture. The PRG, the Professional Review Group, said over our dead bodies, reported to the Landscape Institute, The then Director General, or was his Chief Executive, Alistair MacApra, went along and talked to the new head of school, along with Joe Watson, who was then President of the Landscape Institute. Joe was a chum of Neil Spiller, the new head of school. They'd been students together at Greenwich, and as a result, departmental status was lost. Yeah?
Good old MacApra.
So, Landscape Institute not standing up for its own education system, not valuing independent departmental status. Another example is it's close to my home, it's in the sense of my academic home, in the sense that I did the Newcastle course. 2003, there were two internationally well-known courses under threat. That in Munich, in Bavaria, and that at Newcastle. 200 letters were written internationally from America. I was involved with EFLA, the European Foundation for Landscape Architecture, and wrote a letter in terms of the Munich course. The course was saved. Hardly anything happened with the Newcastle course.
Yeah.
Hardly any protests.
Yeah.
Now this is a story which Frank Clark tells in the ILA Journal about the closure of the Reading course, that there was not a whimper from the Institute of Landscape Architects.
That's true.
Yeah? Hardly a whimper. As a result, the Institute of Landscape Architects lost a valued and accredited course.
It was closed already.
And Frank Clark went on to Edinburgh. We should promote more research, we should argue for more professors, we should argue for higher standards.
Yeah.
Set standards. At the moment, the Landscape Institute, Poppy, you might like to comment later, at the moment, the Landscape Institute, on the face of it, might be avoiding standards. It doesn't regulate its own membership. This is my own membership record. I can give my area of practice, which is what the old divisions are called, and I could decide that I'm a landscape designer, I'm a landscape manager, I'm a landscape planner, I'm a landscape scientist, and an urban designer. I would argue that this is a threat to education standards. I differ from perhaps what John was suggesting earlier on. Was it yourself, John? It's very easy to forget that there was a battle to win for landscape architecture education, the 3+1. Remember that in this country, landscape architecture education is shorter than most other countries internationally. In Germany, in most places, it's 5 years. In America, you've got a 4-year undergraduate degree and then a 2 or is it 3-year conversion MBA. Here, it's just 4+1, or you've got a 2-year master's conversion, 3+2. And it'd be very easy, that RTPI have already lost this battle, to switch to 1-year conversion courses for landscape architecture and for 3-year courses. Landscape management is already 3 years, as is urban design. That's one, it's mainly 1-year postgrad courses. The Landscape Institute doesn't regulate its areas of practice, is the issue. Got no objection to there being 1-year urban design courses and then becoming full members of the Landscape Institute. That's not my point. My point is that one has to value the present 3+1 BA plus 1-year diploma or 2-year conversion in landscape architecture, because that is already below what are internationally recognised standards generally. Just value what you've got, don't lose it, don't throw it away. And the final issue, I'm near the end of my slides, I'll look for precedents. This is undergrad recruitment from UCAS, end of cycle 2015 figures of the last 8 years. Landscape and garden design, which is what we're in, so this excludes landscape management and landscape science accredited courses. It's been around 190 up to 290. It's around 200 or so. So it's not doing as badly as planning, which has been halving It's a point about central government cutbacks and particularly local authorities. It's not doing as low as botany. It's more or less the same as forestry, except it's bigger numbers, and agricultural sciences. It's more in that league rather than what one should be looking for of precedents. Architecture, which has increased, civil engineering, which has increased, mathematics, which has increased, or biology, physics and chemistry, which have all increased from these fairly low figures to these sort of figures. Those are precedents which one can look at.
Yes.
All of these are STEM subjects which are supported by central government.
Yes.
So, the basic argument is that one should think and take action.
There is time now for questions from Robert, to Robert and to Richard. Speaking personally from my own institution point of view, we are cushioned by the Chinese intake. Our undergraduate numbers now are below 20 in terms of acceptances. That's below a sustainable economic limit. Our MLA numbers are 64 as an intake per year, 90% of which are from China. So if that Chinese market disappears, then landscape architecture in Edinburgh and Scotland disappears as well, because our architectural masters and the university will be merciless. Oops. Okay, questions for Robert and Richard.
One for Robert. It's a mystery to me what happened to landscape architecture in the UK. I mean, if you look at the position it held in the 30s, 40s, 50s, into the 60s, now you'd have a hard time naming an internationally prominent British landscape architect, which gives a lot of work to the Dutch and the French, I realize, but maybe that will change with Brexit. And people don't have explanation. The only one I heard that was, and we haven't heard that today, is the strength or the prominence of garden design in Britain has had a negative effect on landscape architecture because of the publicity it gets and the Chelsea flower show and things. Do you think there's any correlation? In most other countries, like in the US, you're increasing the number of landscape programs.
To some extent, I find it a bit of a mystery. There is a historical thread which I would like to mention, which hasn't been mentioned today, which is does relate to one of my arguments, which is McHarg's course. He favoured UK graduates, and there were always two or three a year through the 50s and through the 1960s into the 1970s. And many of those, I mean, Michael Lancaster set up the Greenwich course, for example. He was involved in setting up the Greenwich course, which I was involved in, and they were influential. Another point is that in the 50s and 60s and 70s, there were huge projects, particularly because of new towns, nationalised industries, open cast executive coal, open cast coal mining, strip mining or whatever, central electricity generating board, the reservoir programme. Now one would look at High Speed 2, which LDA are working on as being the equivalent. And landscape architecture, as a professional body, has retreated. And so you can then bring in the expansion of urban designers or the growth of garden designers, which is a very definite. The thing about garden design is one can know what they are and they appear on television, which is good. It's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. To which I would add, rather provocatively, that we're basically, as a profession, we're wanting to increase the intellectual mediocrity of the profession by reducing UCAS tariffs. Very argumentative. I mean, you can argue. I could propound an argument against that, but that's what the figures would seem to indicate.
Can I add to that? I think there are two important things. England is renowned as a nation of gardeners, and it's almost a sin if you have to consult a professional to design your garden. So, R.D. Jane does it. There's no intellectual merit in it at all. And the other thing, which I've seen very much as a from a horticultural standpoint, is that there is this reputation that horticulture is very good for disabled people, mentally and physically. And you reverse that argument and say you have to be mentally or physically disabled to be a horticulturalist. And the two together have this very powerful, I've seen quite keen applicants to Reading whose teachers have said, you can't study horticulture, you're bright. And it is the amateur status of gardening. And of course in the States, I think, many of my friends who graduated from American universities practice in garden design. They take it quite seriously. Here, the landscape architecture profession has regarded getting involved in gardens as a bit of, if you're a photographer, wedding photographer, the lowest of the low. And same with garden design. So the landscape profession has not really embraced gardens and wider landscapes. So all of that stirs up to give us a very bad reputation. Anybody can do it. You don't need a 3 or 5.
And we have a plethora of questions. I mean, Christoph, Poppy. I think Poppy was first.
Oh, thank you. I thought both really interesting talks. It was really interesting what you were saying, Robert, about thinking about how universities are run and how they can change to help support it. But I do really think that one of the main issues is that there are just not enough students, UK students coming in. And the figures you did for UCAS were really interesting. I think one thing that was missed off was the amount of design study students there are. There are 19,000 new design study students going into courses every year. And I think, I mean, I'm part of this, that the profession just hasn't done very well at promoting the process of the profession. We have these amazing images, but if you're a student going in to do, let's say, graphic design, how do you know that a lot of those things you're going to do, you can also do on the courses? And I'd just be interested to hear about, you did this, what the universities could do, but also what can the profession be doing to really raise that awareness. And I like that point of we don't have any notable figures, landscape architecture figures that, are shouting out about it kind of publicly. I just didn't know if anyone had any thoughts
What
about
are there prominent projects?
We have Christoph in the queue for a question.
I also have comments rather than questions.
Yeah, okay.
From Bristol University College, which is called now since last year. We don't have a professor in landscape architecture, but there is no professor at this college at all. So we don't have a professor in that institution. And you said that there are 8 people, according to latest figures. Those figures are quite old. I think we are down to 3 or 4. Someone just left. Yeah. If that person will be replaced, that's the question. This is a sad side. And we run 2 undergrad courses, landscape and garden design and landscape architecture. They just got revalidated. And the argument was, we wanted to, especially my colleagues who have been there much longer than myself, they argue that basically a marketing tool, because many prospective students don't know what landscape architecture is, but they are willing to study landscape and garden design. And the end, as both are accredited courses by the Landscape Institute, they can progress to the master level when they tend to choose only landscape architecture. Nevertheless, we have a garden design master's, which is only for international, it turns out, because for them there is no value in chartership. So they Korean basically, German sometimes, so non-UK students. The other thing is, which I think touches on Jan's talk, we have a very high percentage of UK students, but in a very low basis, of course. We have now, if the last cohort that we had the first time ever, fell below 10. But I think 7 of them are UK students. But the satisfaction survey shows it's much more popular because people like this kind of hands-on, one-to-one tutorial basis, so it's very popular. It does really well in the national student survey. Too bad, it falls below the threshold, so it doesn't appear anywhere. But these are amazing.
Thank you.
Yes, I had a question about whether there was also a scarcity of jobs for the people who come out of landscape? I don't know the answer at all to that
I think
question.
the audience probably can respond. Information I get from practitioners.
They all get hired.
They all get, it's about 90 to 95% employment rate of students level, but they nearly all get hired because they want to go into the profession.
I think the statistic for the built environment professions is about 65% on average.
Yeah, it's extremely high.
And the salary levels, because the offices are competing for students, the salary levels are better than architecture.
Yes.
Yeah, even a placement student, our placement students will be starting on a salary of 19,000. It's very good.
Just going on from that, ask for views on why we think there is this discontinuity between, as it were, the marketplace for landscape education and the marketplace in this country for landscape professions. It is truly bizarre. I've been involved with a postgraduate course in urban design recently, where over 4 years there were only 5 UK nationals applying. And yet, as we know, there's a huge market for graduates in urban design in this country. What is the explanation for this huge disparity?
Well, my argument is that there's been down the spiral of staffing, and so universities have not really got their act together, with a couple of exceptions.
I've been out promoting the profession, and I just think there's a complete lack of awareness about what it is. You speak to students, teachers, parents, and no one understands it. There's no coherent kind of message about what it is.
So it's a lack of clarity in our identity.
Yeah.
Could I just break off at this moment, just to say we're meant to have all the speakers up here. So could Jan, please, and Guy, come to the front, and then we've got more of a...
We'll pop these blinds up as well. We can up the light levels a little bit.
Yeah. Can you get the hands?
Chorus?
Yes. Yeah, we'll sing in a minute. Yes.
Barbershop.
Sorry, I just make a point.
Well, the word I wanted to use has just been used, identity. He was doing a PhD in physics, and he asked Pat Dawson, what is landscape architecture? He said, I don't know, it's what I do. Clark was employed 3 days a week. And one day with the Institute of Park Administration, which later became Institute of Park and Recreation Administration, one day at the New Town, and 3 days with landscape architecture. One day with the first year, one day with the second year, one day with the third year. He was only ever a part-time member of staff, and he was the only member of staff who was teaching landscape architecture.
And he split his time between fine art, which was fine art.
No, he didn't have anything. He didn't have anything to do with fine art.
No, he was employed by.
Well, yes, but
and
exactly. But and now I just wanted to say quickly about schools and departments. When the RIBA wanted to go to the University Grants Commission for more architectural schools, they were refused, and said expand the ones that are already in existence. Amalgamate or go to those which already exist. If you left a school of art, college of art, which was composed of several schools, school of painting, sculpture, and so on, drawing. As soon as you got into a university, you were no longer a school, you were a department. So I was here at this place, there were only about 1,100 students, and we were in departments. We didn't go to a department, we went to a university. with 1,100 people it was possible to know everybody. And we had so much time that we ran the university. We did most of the work, and in terms of entertainment, in terms of intellectual ideas, exploration, the subjects we were doing were of less importance than being in the university. So I think, in retrospect, I mean, I'm just so impressed by what you've both been talking about today, and the way in which you've done it. I mean, I'm out of my depth, completely out of my depth. But I don't want to turn this into a personal anecdote. But you explain a great deal about the difference between those people who, and I was one of them, having grown up through that tradition, then become a teacher. I don't fit to be a teacher according to present standards. In fact, I wouldn't even get into your course. I certainly wouldn't get into your course. But whether or not I should have been at a university is another matter. I think I should have been, but what I should have been doing, I really don't know.
Well, you did well, whatever you did.
We've got Helen and then we've got Karen.
Picking up on something Boris just said, what is the role of research in the delivery of landscape education? We're very often labelled as a non-academic subject, and yet many vocational subjects have got very strong research backing, foundations, whatever part of the anatomy you want to use. There is a problem now with some universities, it's this subservience thing, the architecture saying, well, you have to have a PhD to get a job to teach here. There's also the argument you need practitioner teachers, we probably need both. But I'm just wondering what the panel's view is on the role of research.
Well, we can't not do it, you know. In order to survive within a university climate, we've got to do it. And to me, that has never been much of a problem, but to some of my colleagues, it has. It doesn't come naturally to all landscape architects. And yeah, as you say, the requirements in the last couple of years have become much more stringent, you know. But it's the main requirement now is grant capture. So you may be good in all the other things. You may be able to design and you may be able to write, but if you're not able to capture the grants, you can't stay either. So you've got to do all three as sort of equal measures. No research without grants. So all the stuff which I've been doing like this, which I can do at home on my kitchen table, isn't being valued. And so there are real issues in the current sort of climate, which is being reinforced by changing university structures, which, you know, in ours it's not the Vice Chancellor anymore who takes the decisions, it's the Pro-Vice Chancellors who takes the decisions.
I think that reflects something which is actually, I think, relating back to what Robert was explaining. I don't think universities have still got used to the fact that most of their income is now coming, the vast majority of their income is now coming from fees. So the balance between research and teaching and learning, that pattern in terms of has changed. I think it's started to shake up the structures. So the sense of the power in universities, I think, are still in a point where they're shifting. And so I think the responses are going to be very different. I think it's really interesting that the power is being devolved in some ways in Sheffield. I think what we've seen here is a new research structure that's based around thematic research that cuts across that supposedly cuts across the traditional silos of academic discipline in teaching. Of course, what it does is potentially creates new silos within those themes. But there is I think a lot of universities, and I think are facing that situation. I think what will be interesting to see whether the extent to which the people who are within landscape architecture are able to take advantage of that, because what it may do is it may shake out some greater opportunities for interdisciplinary research for those who are open to interdisciplinary research as a profession, as an academic discipline, and naturally interdisciplinary. And I think that's something that could work extremely well, but at the same time it's all fraught with danger. So I don't think universities have sorted out their attitude to research at all at the moment, and how that reflects their structures now that the income model is massively switched over to teaching.
Mark, you were first.
No, this is a really interesting thing because I think there's become a confusion between research institutes and research universities. University, to me, the primary goal is still education. And I happen to have been at Sheffield a couple of years ago for a semester, and spoke with, I'd say, between 50 and 60 students informally, and only 2 of them thought they were going on for advanced degrees that involve research. The other ones came to be landscape architects, and yet there's nothing in the system that rewards people who are teaching. In fact, it's taking time away from their research. You know, and as Jan said, and then the pressure to do, if not interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary, but to do transnational research and to get EU grants, when a lot of us, I mean, Jan, I should say, yeah, you can do it at home, and that's the whole point. We like doing it. We don't like managing a research team. We like to do this stuff ourselves. And yet, it hasn't hit the US. I mean, we don't have national universities. I think that's how we avoid the system. Education was the state's right when the country was founded. So you don't have these pressures, these national systems, the way you do here. And the master's degree is still regarded as a terminal degree if you're teaching design or whatever that isn't a super specialized subject or more scientific or historical. But it'd be very nice, I mean, your figures are really interesting that the income is coming from fees. I mean, we have so-called state schools, which, like Berkeley, I think, historically got less than 50% of the money from the state, and now it's somewhere around 15 or 18%. And so a lot of it is also coming from fees, and it's changing things.
I think the environment's changed too, because when I first came to Reading, universities were places where you did research, and the product that sort of spilled over as pearls of wisdom to your students, they were a bit of a nuisance. But as students became more important, partly because they assessed you, and that went online, we now have quite a sophisticated, it's actually a teacher's training program, and you have to qualify as a teacher to progress in the side. I mentored my younger colleague, and he knew far more about teaching and teaching methods and philosophy and so on than I did. I just stood up and spouted.
Could I just say in answer to the question, I think there are huge areas of opportunity in vocationally related research in landscape, related to the environment, very basic ways, air, water, soil, all sorts of areas, which could be taken up by landscape architects working with other areas. But the whole area of research is fraught at the moment because of Brexit and particularly EU funding.
Can I ask, Guy, have you
then Karen
in the university archive here? Are there? Do you retain examination papers, examination questions?
Yes.
You do. Have you got for landscape architecture dissertation subjects?
For the period of the original diploma course?
Yes.
Not on the top of my head, I can't remember whether we have that.
Those two things are crucial, I think.
We certainly have the examination papers. I don't know whether we have the dissertation subjects because I don't.
Thank you.
Karen.
Thank you. In terms of the status of the profession, I don't know if anybody heard Desiree Discs recently when the architect Amanda Levent was on, and she was stealing our space very, very blatantly. The thing that interests her is not the building, it's the space outside the building, it's the public realm, it's the space in between. And landscape wasn't mentioned, landscape architecture wasn't mentioned. I don't know if we did a retort, if the LI did something about that, but that was very striking. And then just about, Robert, you mentioned the courses closing down over the years and shouting for them and trying to make a case for them. Over the course of my formal post-school education, I've been involved with, I've graduated from 3 different universities. One of them is was a landscape school. The other two are brilliant at chasing me, keeping in touch with me, wanting me to get involved in things and network and, you know, go to them and give them money, no doubt, which I don't have. But the landscape school has never ever contacted me. Now that could be, I went to Birmingham, so Birmingham's changed and it's morphed into other things. But the schools are not working hard at keeping in touch with the graduates, and I think that's a bit of an issue.
Gentleman at the back.
Poppy. I just want to make a point about the research. I think the point about research is that to get a research grant, you have to have peer review. To have your research published, you have to have peer review. Some people don't like going through that process, and it's a horrible process because referees say stupid things frequently, but it's part of the game you have to play. But it sort of legitimises what you do. And I think that students actually do appreciate members of staff who are research active, even if their research is maybe slightly esoteric compared with what they teach day to day. But the other point is that Guy makes a point about government funding now is moving towards interdisciplinary research, which is all very well to say, because it's actually quite difficult to do, and it's even more difficult to get published. Because instead of having 2 referees, you might have 4. But some of the themes at the moment are very suitable for the landscape architects, like pollinators. Richard was doing, you know, flower-rich meadows 30, 35 years ago. Everyone is hoovering up research funds now to try and look into this sort of thing. Water runoff is another thing where landscape architects can get involved.
Tim.
I was just saying, I think one of the things we seem to be losing slightly is the universal selling point, USP essentially, because there was an article recently saying how you know all the individual designers at Chelsea, because they also tend to be individual, where once you become corporatised as well, you know, you lose some of the definition as well. And it's some of the, obviously the garden designers doing things like Chelsea Power Station, they're doing very big schemes. You look at Dan Pearson and others who are not notionally called landscape architects to start with. So we seem to be losing an idea of what particular speciality and talents we bring better than a garden designer overall. And I remember hearing in an ASLA conference once someone was getting an award and we asked him how he got into being a landscape architect once. And he said, well, I like moving land around, I didn't want to be a civil engineer, and I like shaping things, but I didn't want to be an architect, and I like horticulture overall. And the guy said, well, you sound messed up enough to be a landscape architect. But I think it's like, what skills do we bring to the party? Because I think courses need to carry on going and equipping people for more senior roles if we are going to actually have areas of influence. Because, for instance, when I spoke to my staff, even though 60% of our development is meant to be on previously developed land, they knew nothing about contaminated land. They were never taught about it in school. Anything to do with sort of soils, lead levels, etc., phytotoxic levels, etc. They knew nothing about it. When I lectured at Greenwich, I asked people about coefficients of linear expansion, about putting materials together. They don't know what I was talking about. So I think, yeah, you're going to have to raise the game technically about what we're offering, because ultimately architects think they can do all the hard landscaping, so they don't really need us. And ultimately they're looking for people who just know the names of plants. At worst, you know, and I think we just need to raise our game, as well as nobody on my practice has ever had lectures in management on their courses. They've been individual designers. So the idea of coordinating and motivating a team and being a team leader never came in as part of their course either. So I think there's huge areas where the courses themselves have to be improved. And I have to say, I know there's always a debate about practice and education, but we quite like our students sort of oven ready if we could really. Because when we're putting in feed bids, there's nothing in the feed bid that says we're allowing time to train people. There is no fat on the system anymore if we're going to beat other practices. And the schools can't wait for us to pick up the tab to complete the bits they don't do really. So they're going to have to actually, I think, produce better graduates if we're going to succeed.
Well,
everybody gets to do list a bit.
But we know that the ideal education in the eyes of the practitioner is someone who's just graduated and can work as if they've had 10 years experience, but are willing to be paid the beginning salary. You know, that's the ideal education.
You got it.
My name is Emily Smith. I'm from Northern so delighted to be here and meet you all. Thank you. I don't necessarily have any questions or comments. I have loads of them, but I suppose I'd give a bit of context as to what we've been struggling with. We're in a situation now in Northern Ireland where ACOM employs 25% of our landscape architects. So all of our small landscape architecture practices have more or less disappeared. We have 2 or 3 medium-sized ones and ACOM. And ACOM, none of them can get any staff, any graduates, anything that there is. We don't have a course in Northern Ireland. There was a course from 2008 to 2012, which I was course director for, but it was taken away. Anyway, so our practices are employing anybody. They're taking architectural technologists, they're taking architects, they're taking people who failed in architecture to be their landscape architects, training them up in house. That's what they have to do. Because they're just, and they're getting paid well. These failed architects are getting paid more than the architects who are working in architecture. Our employers have been saying, well, okay, we can't get a university for whatever reason, we can't get a university program. Our universities have been suffering, I believe, more than, we've only got 2 universities in the North of Ireland, but they've been suffering budgetary more than in Britain for other reasons to do with our own parliament and lack of parliament. So we're definitely not as healthy, I would say, as many of the British ones that you've been reviewing. But so our employers have been saying, well, look, what about apprenticeships? What about evening CPD from the colleges? And so that's really a question I put to you as panels. Yes, if there seems to be bizarrely no ability to make university courses work, what are the other options? And certainly that's something that we're trying to explore. Bizarrely, the Open University doesn't have a landscape architecture program, and I've been in touch with them to say, and they're saying, well, look, okay, just tell us what it is that you would deliver and how you would deliver it, and we'll see if we can do it. So they're open to. Our government is crying out for landscape architectural expertise in policy and obviously in practice and the lack of it. Going to the universities have said this, but you have to bring a research active income generating course to us. So my question into the panel is, well, what about PhDs? How many PhDs do you get? Which isn't necessarily professor-led or lecturer-led research, but is, the other way around, is the students bringing the incomes that way, funded by departments or funded by business. So in that little bit of context, there are a couple of questions.
Well, we've got about 45 PhD students.
45?
In landscape?
Yeah, in landscape.
Wow.
Yeah. We've gone down a little bit, we had 50. And the applications are healthy. We've been asked to reduce the number and increase the quality because PhD students are expensive to run, apparently. So that's what we're trying to do at the moment, and we're having a meeting next week about it. So how are we going to do that? Strategies. So fewer but higher quality as well. I don't know. We'll see. But there are plenty PhDs, but then not all of them can find work.
Maybe you need to farm some of your PhD applicants out to the other universities. If you're not allowed to have so many.
Yeah.
How many of these are home students?
Yeah. A limited percentage.
Okay.
Yeah, sort of 5, 6, yeah.
So many, is it?
Yeah.
Does it, I can answer your point about apprenticeships afterwards. The Landscape Institute is looking into apprenticeships for landscape architecture because it's a huge area we're completely missing a trick on, and there's so much funding going into it now. There is options of looking at both technical level apprenticeships and degree level apprenticeships to kind of have that continuity. If it is something that goes ahead, it needs to be employer led. You have new groups called Trailblazers, which are made up of landscape professionals who will be leading the design of it, led by industry for industry, which I think is really, really positive. So it's definitely something we'll be looking into.
Just a note of regret, it's such a pity that the two part-time courses, which were meant to be 1 day a week, that at Greenwich and that at Birmingham City University, seem to have faded away, which wasn't necessary. It wasn't market forces that caused them to fade away. It was the lack of gumption in the staff, I imagine.
Well, that's sad, because we used to have people who went to Birmingham, and it was always very nice in the office because they came back sort of a bit refreshed by the day of being taught, and it spread through the office. People started talking about what they brought back.
And it was a model that the Regent Street Poly, which is now University of Westminster, isn't it, of course, followed in the 1950s. So it's a tested model.
And also, particularly as a woman, it's a very good way of keeping your career
Yes,
going.
yes.
Because you're probably going to take time out anyway and get buggered up that way.
Yeah.
So if you did it like that, which is I did it with Felicity, I think worked with you, it was a great way to continue education, but keep working and keep getting experience in practice.
Unless anybody's got an urgent question, we were meant to clear out by 4, so it's pushing it a little bit. We've got one.
It's right. I would turn the whole conversation back to discussion about archive and you know, where do we come from and what do we do with our stuff. That's what so in our our Landscape Institute in Northern Ireland, the history and evolution of that is completely different than the Landscape Institute in Britain. So in 2015 we celebrated our 50th anniversary, and we did a bit of work on trying to find out who we were and where we come from, that sort of thing. And we actually, as the branch, we sent every member a questionnaire and said, where were you trained? What qualification did you get? Where did you go to work afterwards? And what have your significant projects been? Oh, I don't know, I can't remember. I think we got about 30% response, or maybe a bit more than that. Maybe more than that. And we haven't done anything with that information, it's just sitting in a proverbial box, if you like. But we've got it, and I think it's useful. And a lot of the responses back were that very comment about corporate. I work in a corporate, a big business. I don't know which projects are really mine. I don't have any access to that information. That's the big Acorn type business place. That, you know, it's not mine, and so there was in the younger folk, there was a real feeling of not knowing what they had done that was really of any interest. They didn't have any sense of these are my big projects, if you like, that I'm proud of. What we also did, and we didn't do enough of, was that we endeavoured to interview our older and more important, no, not necessarily more important, older landscape architecture practitioners. And we only did a couple, and I don't know why we stopped, because there were so many that we didn't do that are important, that still need to be done. But we have that, and you know, we maybe did an hour's interview and we could clip it down to a couple of minutes, picked out some of the bits. Our agenda was that we had applied to the Heritage Lottery Fund to get this up as a working database, so that we had local government reform. Our local governments are suddenly in charge of things like planning and regeneration and that. So the idea was that they could be able to look into this database and say, oh look, we've been asked to do a new pedestrian precinct, oh look, it's already been designed 5 times before, oh here are the stories behind the people who designed it, the whys and the wherefores, and why did it end up the way it is. So it was a learning tool, and the little interviews with people. So we based it, Mark, on the Cultural Landscape Foundation, I think it's called TCLF. I think it's fantastic, and I think that we really, really badly need to be doing something like that. And the more we celebrate who we are, and that's a way of understanding and promoting that understanding, the more other people will understand where we are. If government policy knows what we're up to and what we can do, why can somehow or other the people in the street not? And the people who are yet to come, those 10-year-olds.
Do you mind if I take this one, Robert? Because I mean, it's essentially an archive question. We've discussed it, but firstly, I want to just salute the work that's been done in Northern Ireland on this, because in the end, the archives, we talk about them like there's some abstract thing that kind of happens. They come out of people taking actions, and they come out of communities caring about where they've come from and caring about their past. They don't come from anywhere else. They don't come, the place they certainly don't come from is from archivists. We reap the benefits, and hopefully facilitate others to reap the benefits. So I want to salute the work that you've done, and I know we'll speak afterwards about thinking about that forming. I think one of the fantastic things about what we were talking about this morning, about moving towards perhaps a model that is more digitally engaged, is that we are able to that where that type of resource sits becomes less important, and I think that's particularly important in the context of when we're thinking about regions, regional structures within the LI, but particularly when we're talking about constituent nation of the United Kingdom structures, so for Scotland and for Wales and for Northern Ireland. It's particularly important where there are particular structures and things around archiving that we want to have a think about. So I think we need to do something digitally. I think is probably a really big thing. And the great thing about that is it then reaches your 10-year-olds, or it has the potential to start to reach your 10-year-olds, to start to influence public opinion, to start to influence the wider public and their understanding of what. So in the same way that we have an archive here, you come into the reading room, you're generally going to have a particular level of understanding. We've also got this museum where anyone can walk in for free and they can have a look around. They've got no understanding and no knowledge that they even want to have an understanding of the subject area. They've just come in and they've done that. So I think we have to think about what we can do digitally. And the third thing, which hopefully will give you a bit of encouragement, is that at least about archiving, is that we've actually in an architectural side of things. So I bring architecture into the room, but. We've taken quite an important archive of a partnership called DEGW, space planning, really a very influential one. And their archive was held by ACOM, and we actually found them to be very, positive people to work with, actually, in terms of being aware of the histories that I suppose they have hoovered up. And so actually there was a relationship there, and I don't think it's necessarily impossible that because the archives have to reflect what's actually happening in practice, actually happening in the world. And if what's happening in the world is that everything's moved towards big corporate designs, then that history should be recorded as well. And so I think I'd encourage us actually to say, not to say, well, actually we seem to be collecting, we don't seem to be able to go out and collect these lovely records of individual practices anymore. Well, if that's not what's actually there, then we have to collect what is there. And so I think it is not impossible necessarily to have actually to have that positive relationship even with those big corporates. We were slightly surprised at how well it went.
Could I just point out that we've got handouts on two events coming up. Next Wednesday, Cowcross Street near Farringdon in London. Karen here is talking under the subject of drawing on Denmark, Ben Jacobsen, 6:30. That's that one. And also it's been mentioned earlier today, the Gardens Trust seminar on Monday, the 5th of June, which is mid to late 20th century designed landscapes. There's a handout here. Thank you very, very much indeed.